Okay, calm down. You got nervous, man. You got nervous, man. Okay, calm down.
Hello and welcome to a special installment of the Katie Halper Show and Useful Idiots. We are doing a breaking news live stream to address what is happening in California because we didn't have guests on this week to talk about it. And it felt like something that we really needed to address. We talked about other stories. We did talk about it on Useful Idiots a little bit, but we didn't do an interview on it. And since there's so much happening and it's so important and the media is getting it so wrong, we wanted to make sure that we did a special stream on this. So it's a real, an amazing lineup. We are going to be talking to David Sirota, who helped create the film Don't Look Up, Josh Olson, the Oscar-nominated screenwriter, Maegan Day, a writer and editor at Jacobin, Natali Segovia, an international human rights attorney and water protector, Stephen Donziger, and also a human rights and environmental lawyer. And we are starting with Yasha Levine, who is a Russian-American investigative journalist, writer, and filmmaker who has done vital reporting on the privatization of California's water by billionaires such as the Resnicks. Now, this is, again, a special Katie Halper Show Useful Idiot stream. So hello to everyone who's here. Make sure you like this stream, whether you're watching on either channel. Like it, share it, subscribe. And if you can support this, obviously we're not at all paywalling this. But if you can support either show, you can do that at usefulidiotspodcast.com or patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show, and you get extra content. Okay, so I'm just going to bring on Yasha, who's also working on a film we're going to talk about called The Pistachio Wars. Yasha, please, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. You?
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So tell us about what is happening right now in California as we speak. You're not in LA, but you're from LA. And I want to ask you about how water privatization relates to this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in California generally, in San Francisco, and then I moved down to LA later. So I've generally I've lived in, California since I was 9 years old, after we came to America from the Soviet Union. So I know California very well. I know it up and down the state, and I've lived in various parts of the state, so I know it very well. I mean, what's going on in LA right now is, very tragic, but it's very simple. There are several large fires that have happened in different parts of the greater Los Angeles area, and primarily in sort of the hilly areas, and they've just totally devastated entire neighborhoods, and the people who haven't had their houses burned or burned yet, a lot of people are evacuating because it's very difficult to breathe. People are having all these, adverse reactions to the smoke, to all the toxic chemicals in the smoke. So it's really an apocalyptic, very frightening situation there. Yeah. And primarily what is being driven by our, nature, and but also a lot of, I don't know, human folly, I guess you could say, or political decisions that have been made over many decades. And I'd say maybe even, I don't know, a century or more, in the way that things are built in California, the way that development is allowed to occur in California, the way that the political and economic system is built in California, is on real estate. Real estate is very central, and real estate speculation is very central. So real estate development and the building of houses and places where they should not be built is out of control. And so this is a result of that. But of course, climate change, and increasing drought, and seasonal dry winds, which occur every year around this time in California, in Southern California, where actually it could be the driest time of the year. And so they all kind of come together to create this perfect condition for these infernos. And we can sort of break it down later on, as we talk about it, these various different aspects of the fire. But there are, political aspects to it, but also natural aspects to it that are inescapable
Right.
to a large degree. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you have a fascinating article, which we can throw up on the screen. It's called "Oligarch Farmers and the Fires in Los Angeles," and you write about the ecocidal terraforming system that underpins the California way of life. You also have, uh, and we can take a look at what what this terraforming looks like. That would be video 3, Brad. But can you talk about this article and talk about terraforming, and then we're gonna get into the Resnick family. And I guess for the sake of this broadcast, I think we can focus on, I mean, obviously there are natural things that are inescapable.
Hmm.
It's important to show people what the human-made
Yeah.
contributions are. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this natural stuff is inescapable, but the way that we intervene in the natural landscapes and sort of decisions that we make as as a society, obviously exacerbate or minimize these natural kind of issues. And so I'd say in California and a lot of places in America and around the world, the way that development occurs is like exacerbates all the natural dangers and all the natural cataclysms that occur, without any kind of human hand. And
Sure.
so, yeah. Well, look, what I meant, so it's funny because there's this billionaire couple. It's one of the most powerful couples or families in the Los Angeles area. Their names are Stuart and Linda Resnick. They're billionaires. They're one of the largest. They own one of the largest farms in America. They are primarily involved in growing pistachios. I mean, if you've seen pistachio commercials or, some people like Stephen Colbert hawking pistachios on prime time or like on halftime games, the NFL playoffs, or if you go to any like grocery store, you'll see pistachios. It's usually their pistachios, and they're the ones who essentially created a market for pistachios and are pushing it on people. So they own these like vast tracts of pistachio orchards, and also almond orchards and some orange orchards and stuff like that in the heart of California, in the Central Valley, in this very sort of dry, very flat part of California. I mean, they own so much land. They own hundreds of squares of miles of land. And so you could drive for like an hour at, I don't know, at freeway speeds and really not leave their property. Like it's vast. I mean, the scale of it it's horizon to horizon. That's like the size of their farms. And and for whatever reason, they've started really to go viral after these fires in Los Angeles started happening, because I think people, some of the reporting that I did and some of the reporting that other journalists did, kind of the headlines from that reporting started to go viral because people are saying, wait a second, there's this billionaire couple that lives in Beverly Hills. They live in LA and they control more water than Los Angeles, than the entire city of Los Angeles uses in 1 year. And here we have these images of firefighters who are struggling to put out these fires. There are reports that fire hydrants are going empty, that they're like literally water is running out to fight these fires. And so this couple has kind of gone viral in a huge way. I think in a way that there's never been so much attention on them, because these fires have really focused attention on them. And I found that to be interesting because on a superficial level, they don't really have that much to do with the fires. I mean, they control water in their farms, kind of farming region, which is way up north, north of Los Angeles. And in theory, they could send water to LA to help the city, but LA is not running out of water. It's not like LA doesn't have water to fight these fires. It's just that the pressure in these systems, because there's so many firefighters using this water, it's sort of so low that there's nothing in the tap. And so LA itself has huge stores of water. So it's not really about a lack of water. And so I wrote this piece kind of looking at them because although they don't have a direct connection to the fire, they do have a connection in like a larger sense, because as farmers who operate in California, these large farmers who operate in California, they are connected to a system that has a direct connection to the fires. And the system is this aqueduct system that exists in California that runs the length of the state. I mean, thousands of miles of aqueducts of these essentially concrete rivers. And I call it a terraforming system. And terraforming, of course, is usually a term that, science fiction fans will, be familiar with. It's usually used to describe, like a sci-fi process of, let's say, if we wanted to live on Mars or something, then Mars would have to be terraformed so that its atmosphere, would match the atmosphere of Earth, right? So humans could live somewhere in an alien environment. And I use this word, very consciously to describe the system that exists in California to move all this water around, because it has transformed the ecosystem and almost the atmosphere of California, but not for human thriving, but for the thriving of kind of a natural ecosystem, but for the thriving of a very, very narrow oligarchic class, I guess. And the system, started to be put in place over a century ago, and it's been built out through the decades into the 70s, 1970s. And this system has dammed every major river in California, and it's moved water from where there is water. Usually it's up in the mountains of California and the Sierra Nevadas and other mountains in California, and moving it to places that could be exploited. Sort of low-lying farm land that could be used for farms, right? That doesn't have continuous water supply. That is essentially a desert. So this desert could be made bloom by taking water from somewhere else, right? Destroying ecosystems somewhere else and bringing that water and bringing kind of artificial life to another part of the state. And LA, the development that has been going on in LA, and the development that's going on, in the hills, but also in the valleys, just all over the place, has occurred largely because of the existence of this terraforming system. Because LA doesn't have a lot of its own water, right? LA never had a huge water supply. If LA could only use the water that it can access through the LA River or sort of the underground aquifers that have accumulated over the years, it would be a really tiny town, It would not sustain this megapolis, this just never-ending suburban sprawl of millions and millions of people. It would be small. And so in order to sustain this development and to create this sort of suburban society, to have the mansion in the hills, right? To have Hollywood, to have all the subdivisions, you need to bring water from somewhere else. And water in Los Angeles is brought from, hundreds of miles away, literally hundreds of miles away. And one of the pipelines crosses state lines and takes water from the Colorado River, which is, crosses the state line in Arizona. So it takes water from a totally different state. Other pipelines take water from 500 miles away. Another pipeline takes water from 300 miles away. So LA is like this kind of suburban octopus that has these tentacles sucking water from ecosystems that are far, far, far away from the actual city, and that water sustains life, right? And so that water has allowed the unchecked development of houses and real estate, all across the LA area. And that's the connection that sort of the Resnicks have to the fire, is that they are feeding on the same very system to feed their farms, to feed their orchards, because their orchards are also in a place that has no water of its own. And so they are part of this larger system that moves water around and terraforms the environment in California. And so it's a really fascinating part of the state. And I think it's very different from, we're both in New York, in the New York area right now. And as you know, there's a lot of water here, right? Like Manhattan, because it's such a dense city, has to get its water from also hundreds of miles away from the city itself. But generally, the small towns and cities around New York have their own water supplies. They don't need to go plunder it from hundreds of miles away. But California and Southern California is very different. all the cities essentially have to get water from somewhere else. All the farms have to get water from somewhere else. So it's this artificial, like computer controlled environment where you have these technicians sitting at these control centers, pushing buttons, sending water, from place to place. It's like, it's a very futuristic, but also a dystopian kind of environment. And so that's their connection to this, to this, larger, I don't know, to this larger political structure that exists here that has allowed these fires to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, everyone, this is an Aaron Mate approved Useful Idiots sanctioned Katie Halper Show Useful Idiots co-stream, but Aaron cannot join us because he had a previous engagement when we decided to do this. But Yasha, going back to you, we actually have a clip of this film that you're working on called The Pistachio War. So let's take a look at that.
In 2015, California was at the peak of its worst drought in history. The news was full of scary stories. Farmers tearing out their crops. They said the state was on the verge of a modern-day Dust Bowl. I was living in LA at the time, so we decided to take a road trip to see this catastrophe for ourselves. This is the heartland of California agriculture. It was supposed to be the epicenter of the drought. But the first thing we noticed when we got out here was that there were new plantings going in everywhere. Massive fields of pistachios and almonds spreading out as far as the eye could see. Farmers were planting thousands of acres of water-hungry new crops, all during the worst drought in history. To find out what was going on, we would have to go back to LA. The people who own these farms live in Beverly Hills. Billionaires Stuart and Linda Resnick are the world's biggest farmers of tree nuts.
They just look terrible, like terrible people, by the way. I can't help but point that out.
Yeah, but you know what, though? One thing, I will say in their favor, they're actually truly in love. This is like a love story, and a kind of a ruthless love story,
Yeah.
Cutthroat businessmen together, yeah.
Like Marley Matlin and James Carville?
I guess, yeah.
Or do we think that they're not in love? That's not clear. That could be a marriage of political convenience. But...
No, I think this is a true love story.
Okay,
yeah,
true love story,
yeah. But so you can
like,
tell,
like Eva Braun, Adolf.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But I'd say they're equal partners in their venture, not in
okay, more
like
egalitarian.
A truly
Right.
equal partnership. Yeah.
So it's a feminist love story. Yeah.
A lib femme, yes, total lib femme stuff.
Yeah, a lib femme. Yeah. So that's funny. Someone wrote like Hitler and Ava, which I think must have been said at the same time as me.
That's hilarious. She's a child of Hollywood. He's a businessman with ties to the mob. Gimmicky mass marketing is a secret to their success. They single-handedly created a boom around pistachios.
Folks, evidently sales of pistachios have not skyrocketed in the last 30 seconds due to a lack of branding. Well, let's take care of that. Pistachio, wait for it. Pistachio.
Wow.
Hello. Somehow, there was no water shortage for these billionaires. While everyone else was told to conserve, they were expanding during the drought. News stories made it all about the weather, as if the drought was natural and inevitable. But as we discovered, the real causes of California's water shortages are man-made. They're political. Farms use 80% of the state's water supply. This one giant corporate farm owned by the Resnicks uses more water than the entire population of LA. There's plenty of water, but it's been privatized by a small group of powerful farmers to grow snack foods in the middle of the desert. Our road trip took us deep into the dusty heart of California. The eco-hippie paradise where farming and oil production live side by side.
When anybody like you wants to run my life, I get upset.
Sir, nobody's running your life. If you'd
You're
like,
trying to.
if you'd like to work in the oil industry, that's your right. I have a right to be an environmentalist.
Yeah, you can be as stupid as you want, and you have that privilege.
We met farm workers in small towns where the tap water was toxic, or not running at all. Why does no one talk about it?
Why? Because they are afraid.
Money.
Money. Money.
From the state level right down to the smallest local district, water was being privatized.
Exactly.
The pumping here, the illegal pumping that you're saying here,
Yes.
is it directly affecting the wells?
Yes.
So why is that not being talked about?
Because money. American greed. Thank you.
And when we crossed paths with a bunch of farm lobbyists, we discovered something surprising about the pistachio boom.
And Iran could go ahead and start exporting to the United States.
It was all dependent on an embargo of imports from Iran.
We have Arabs that live around here. We have Arabs that take care of that own pistachio orchards. Well, how do you feel? You know, does a Muslim bother you?
The secret to world peace is pistachios.
Dennis Rodman does it because he's nuts. Wonderful pistachios. Get cracking.
Wow. That looks great. And that's coming out this spring, right?
Yeah. It brings back some old memories. I haven't seen that trailer in a while. Yeah. Well, it gives you a good little glimpse into their world, Yeah.
Wow. That's
Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, what do you think the yes, here's a question. What is the connection between the Resnicks and Israel? And then we're going to get to speaking of Israel and Gaza, there has been a lot of attention being paid to the fact that James Woods, who is very anti-ceasefire and has said some very disgusting things about Palestinians, he does not believe in climate change, as we'll see right now. You responded to him. So let's do that first. Then we can end on the connection between the Resnicks and Israel, if that's okay. So let's take a look at what James Woods, who lost his home, had to say. The fire is not from climate change, you ignorant a-hole. It's because liberal idiots like you elect liberal idiots like Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. One doesn't understand the first thing about fire management, and the other can't fill the water reservoirs. And then you pointed out the real cause of this, though, Yasha, and you said, no, James, it is because they let gays fight fires. Classic Hollywood lib take from you. So what is your response besides that to, just elaborate on that.
I mean, it's just a joke. Yeah, I know that, I know that everything gets sucked into a stupid culture war in America, right? Yeah. So the culture war is that everything is because you have these, minorities and, the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs or something that's ruining America. And it's just a joke because like I mentioned earlier, one of the main reasons of these fires in Los Angeles, and someone, a historian like Mike Davis has written quite a lot about this, is that Southern California, in these canyons and hills, there are fires that are supposed to happen there every number of years. Just without any human intervention, these places will burn. They'll accumulate kind of dry bush, and if there's a spark from lightning or something, and the wind conditions are just right, they'll burn. And these things will, and if the Santa Ana winds are blowing, which are these dry winds from the south that happen in the winter, it'll just light these places on fire. And so the main problem, is that to build in these areas, you shouldn't be building. It's like building at the bottom of a riverbed, that's like that has seasonal flooding, right? It's like kind of like the Nile or something, like floods happen. And if you build in a flood zone, you're going to get flooded. And you can try to have, mitigate it in various ways, which in Southern California, they have been doing that. They've essentially suppress fires all the time. And if anything starts, they put it out immediately. You have these firefighters. But if you build in these areas where fires naturally rip through the canyons, rip through the hills, right? you're not always going to be able to put out the fire in time, right? And so there are, ways to manage it. They started doing like controlled burns, burning in a controlled manner certain chunks of these hills so that to prevent huge, infernos from erupting. But that's still managing it, right? The fact is that you should not build in certain areas. And these hills, they're beautiful. They're ocean views. They're up, this is some of the best, most expensive real estate in Los Angeles. And people shouldn't build there, right? So you're kind of going against nature and you're trying to manage nature, and you can only manage it so long until it kind of gets out of control. And this happens all the time in Los Angeles. Malibu burns every now and again because of in Malibu in particular, the structure of the canyons and the hills there is such that it creates almost these furnaces, like air currents are concentrated and sped up, right? And so these fires will just like rip. I mean, they'll move faster than a car can. A car can't even outrun them because that's how fast they move. And so it's like it's a known issue in Los Angeles and in the area that this happens. And so to blame it on, Gavin Newsom, and essentially what this is actually completely has nothing to do with. I know they're trying to blame it on the left and they conflate liberals and
Right.
left wingers, but it's a completely and it is like a free market capitalist way of approaching development, right? You essentially allow real estate developers to do whatever they want to make money, and Los Angeles is run, not unlike New York, by real estate interests, right? They control. They're in total control there, and California in general is controlled by real estate interests, like actually most of America. It's a very powerful lobby, but LA in particular, because there's so much land surrounding Los Angeles, there's so much wealth to be made if you allow unchecked development and unchecked real estate speculation. That's always been the economic engine of Los Angeles, real estate speculation. Ever since the railroads first connected to Los Angeles and connected them to, the continental America, like real estate speculation, scams is the business in that city. And so they have a historic, tied to the city government. And so it's the opposite of what James Wood is talking about.
Right.
I mean, it's the problem is unchecked capitalism, and unchecked greed and unchecked development and unchecked expansion, right?
It's
like
pretty bipartisan,
expansion.
right? This issue.
It's a totally not, well, I mean, it's a kind of a partisan, but it's not partisan because both the Democrats and the Republicans are completely on board.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that makes it
you mean a bipartisan. Yeah, it's a bipartisan thing that everyone supports. It doesn't matter if you're Gavin Newsom or if you're Donald Trump, essentially, because Gavin Newsom he represents the landed interests of California. That's who essentially bankrolled his career. And and that's why, I don't know, that's why all these people can get along, they're in the same club essentially. So I think it's trying to make it look like, oh yeah, this black, mayor of Los Angeles, that's the problem because she's too stupid to refill the reservoirs. It's like, well, no, there's, I think once a fire like that breaks out, I don't think there's anything you can do, just because if people have seen the videos from, the Palisades fire, the winds were insane. I mean, they were toppling, these palm trees, these palm trees that they have. They were like bending in half almost. So the winds were hurricane level almost. And so the way that fire can spread, I mean, it just gets spread around a huge wide area, and there's nothing you can do at that point. And so it is really about political decisions that have been made, for us, for the people who live there. And I think that's not part of the conversation at all, because I don't think, the Democrats who are in power in LA, and they are incompetent. I'm not going to, root for them. I'm not going to say they're great, because I do think that the Democrats generally Democrats in California are some of the worst Democrats possible, as we've seen with Kamala Harris, like the deep neoliberalism that they exist in, and the deep, almost provincial incompetence, because California still is a kind of a provincial state, because I don't know, there's just not a lot of attention that people are really unplugged from the political process in a lot of these towns, and including Los Angeles. So there's not a lot of like focus on these elected officials to really, be competent even in like the way that they communicate with the public, is like incompetent. So I'm not saying that they're great or they've done a great job, but it's just the problem is unchecked capitalism. I mean, I don't know. It's crude, but that's what it is. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I just wanted to fill in terms of the James Woods thing that you were responding to. He's getting a lot of crap, rightly so, because he did tweet out no ceasefire, no compromise, no forgiveness, hashtag kill them all. Yeah. And now he's like crying on TV about his house, and they just like built a pool there or something. I don't know. Some major really developments have been lost now. But the good news is, while these fires are raging, we do have some good news, which is that our government is prioritizing the right thing. Yesterday, the House voted 243 to 140 to sanction anyone associated with the International Criminal Court's efforts to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute any protected person of the U.S. and its allies, namely Israel.
That's interesting.
So,
Does that mean, like, let's say if you interview someone, let's say, a justice at the international, or an attorney for one of the sides, let's say for South Africa, would that be considered to be aiding and abetting?
Yeah, I wonder if
would you be sanctioned?
Yeah, I'm like Theodore Meron, who was one of the experts that the ICC turned to when determining deciding to release the arrest warrants. He is a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I mean,
yeah.
so would they be sanctioned, or could they be sanctioned? I mean, is that the letter of the law? I don't know if you know.
No, I don't.
It's a joke. The whole thing is. I know it's like look, it's
they can sanction them. Yeah,
it's
I believe. Yeah.
I think I'll tell you this. I do think that there is because I've been talking, I've been talking to people in LA, and I do that. It might take some time to sink in. What the scale of the destruction. And kind of what it means, I think, for I don't know, like politics in this country. I don't know, because LA is like the people who are affected right now are really some of the wealthiest people in America, you could say, right? Yeah. And so you could see how the system really, you can't even, there isn't even a class element to the system. It really shows that how the system was designed from the beginning, it impacts everyone. Essentially, everyone is tied into it, and everyone will suffer. Obviously, people with wealth can restart their lives anew easier. It's easier for them to do so. But still,
in some ways, it's a great equalizer. In some ways, it's not. But there are certain things that can't be escaped even by the wealthy.
And even on some level, because Palisades is an extremely wealthy enclave in Los Angeles, because the hills are where wealthier people live. These fires do affect the wealthy more than the poor, because the poor will be living in the flats of LA. A fire could rip through these areas, but they're in an almost fully urban environment. Whereas, yeah, so obviously it's complicated because there's some hill communities that have, I don't know, it's not just wealthy people, it's, middle class type people and all this stuff. But for me, what's interesting is that, that's why I kind of made a focus on looking at this terraforming system that exists all across California, is that everybody kind of is tied into it. And because that the system allows Los Angeles to exist, it doesn't really matter who you are in Los Angeles. If you're a celebrity, or if you're James Woods, or if you're someone who mows his lawn, you are kind of connected to it, and you're there because of that system. And the failures of that system and the kind of the dangers of that system will spread, to everyone who lives there. And it is an artificial city, much more so than other cities across America, because it really does depend on just this water, on these very, very precarious, very fragile systems to bring in water, and without water, I mean, it'd be a humanitarian catastrophe in California, right? And so I don't know, and so I get why the Republicans and kind of the right wants to make it into this stupid culture war issue, because it's something that is, I think they like the Democrats are kind of incapable of dealing with, and I think even the Democrats are probably unwilling, and I think just incapable because it would completely go against everything that they stand for.
Right.
And the Democrats, I think, are very happy that the right is making it about a culture war issue, because then the Democrats can just, it's like they feed off each other, right? Because they can then hit back with the same culture war bullshit, right?
Exactly.
And so it's like, and everyone can avoid talking
Great
about the
reflection.
central issue, which is climate change, right? And the fact that the Democrats aren't doing a damn thing about it, and the way that society is organized in a way that promotes, exacerbates natural disasters rather than minimizing them. Yeah.
Right. And last things, can you just tell us briefly about the relationship between the Resnicks and Israel? And then we're going to show a clip of you protesting the Resnicks.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. It's a kind of a long story, but their connection, I think, is personal and business related. So on a personal level, I mean, they're American Jews, so pretty standard, I think, centrist American Jews as far as these goes. And so their views on Israel kind of align with the larger majority of American Jews. They support Israel. They have a private foundation, that from Family Foundation, through which they fund the IDF and support the IDF in various ways. They have, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars that I could find. They so that's just on a sort of a personal level. They have also donated to institutions in Israel, culture institutions. So they're, kind of philanthropists and donors to kind of the military wing of the occupation, but also the sort of the cultural and, kind of the more, kind of non-military or not specifically military parts of Israeli society. So that's one side. And then the other side is a bit more nefarious and I think much more dangerous. And it overlaps with their personal use. It's their business aspect, right? So the pistachio industry was born in America because of the sanctions on Iran. When there was the Iranian Revolution and the Shah was overthrown, Iranian activists essentially took Americans hostage from the American embassy in Tehran. And because of that was the beginning of the first wave of sanctions that was levied on Iran, on the country of Iran. And ever since then, the country has been under some sort of sanctions regime, sometimes less, sometimes more. But in that moment when Iran, which has been traditionally the number one exporter of pistachios to the entire world, the American market was cut off from Iranian pistachios. And at that moment is when kind of the Resnick story or the Resnick farming story begins, really, because they saw that there was an opportunity here, that a new market could be created and a new industry could be created in America because of the protection of these sanctions. And so ever since then, the Resnicks and their wonderful company, that's the name of their agriculture business, the wonderful company, has been, a big proponent of sanctioning Iran, of promoting a very, very aggressive foreign policy position against Iran. They've funded the most extreme neoconservative think tanks that take, the most hardline position possible on Iran, to the point of like starting, doing false flag attacks to start a war. The main one that they are involved with is WINEP. It's the Washington Institute for Near Eastern Studies, and WINEP was created. Actually, it was spun off from AIPAC. It's like an AIPAC spinoff, created specifically because AIPAC has like a bad reputation, and so they created an offshoot to kind of distance itself from the AIPAC name. And WINEP is like, the center for the most extreme neoconservative foreign policy you can imagine. Dick Cheney got his team from it. They're really, among some of the worst think tanks in Washington D.C. And you can imagine, it's a pretty high bar. And so they were involved in that. They're involved in other initiatives, but it's tied to their business because they want to make sure that Iran is sanctioned. Because if Iran's sanctions are lifted, Iran could be a direct competitor with them, right? To their business. And so not only they're working to keep the sanctions, to expand the sanctions. I mean, I think if America goes to war with Iran, they'd be happy because anything that cripples Iran permanently would be good for business,
Right.
And they're always working to convince other countries to levy tariffs on Iranian pistachios. I mean, so they're really trying to box in Iran, and so their business interests, dovetail very, very strongly with the general interests of American empire, right?
Right.
And they're a bit player still. They're not huge. They're not like the oil industry or something like that. But they are a small component of this larger mixture of imperial and business interests, right? That are synergistic. What's good for American empire is good for the Resnicks. What's good for the Resnicks is good for the American empire, and so that's where it comes from. And so, yeah, they're Zionists in their business and in their personal politics. I think is the takeaway message. Yeah.
Great. And can you tell us what you can you set up this clip of yourself protesting them?
Yeah, we were in LA and we kind of wanted to do something because the Resnicks, even in Los Angeles, aren't very well known, even though they are these massive funders of various cultural institutions, art museums. I mean, they fund the two major art museums in Los Angeles, and yet their names are on these buildings, and yet people don't know who they are. And so Yevgeny and I, we were in LA and we decided to do the spontaneous series of protests. And so there was the LACMA Gala, which happens every year. It's sort of like the Met Gala, but in Hollywood. So you have all the celebrities going to this museum, doing this sort of philanthropic evening. And so we decided to just protest outside of the gala to try to educate these celebrities that, look, you're going to this museum that's funded by these major climate criminals, because the Resnicks, because they're very much involved in this terraforming system that takes water from ecosystems and brings them to their farms. They're responsible in this really a massive ecocide that's happening in California. I mean, most of the rivers are dead. There's no life in these rivers. The entire ecosystems that these rivers feed have collapsed. There's this mass extinction event that's ongoing in California, primarily because of this terraforming system and the development that it allows. And so we were out there just trying to have fun and trying to get people to, turn people's attentions to these climate criminals in their midst, kind of like, what was done with the Sacklers. So,
right.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's take a look at that, and then we'll say goodbye to you and bring on our next guest. And thank you so much, Yasha, for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It was great.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Of course.
No. You guys need to cross back over. LACMA whitewashes climate criminals. Why is their name on that pavilion?
So we understand you guys have a right to free speech. We understand. However, we have the law right here. We got a permit for this thing.
We appreciate it. Yeah.
You guys can protest from across the street.
Okay. We appreciate it. We're just gonna keep walking right here.
We can cross back this way.
No, we're just gonna keep walking. Sorry.
It is not. Like I said, we have.
Show me the permit. Is there a permit? Is there a sign somewhere here?
You need to cross back over.
No, sorry. The LACMA whitewashes climate criminals.
Here you go.
The Resnicks are worse than the Sacklers. Kick them out of LACMA. The Resnicks are worse than the Sacklers. Get their name off the LACMA wall. The Resnicks are worse than the Sacklers.
I'm being assaulted. You guys want to keep walking? Walk out. I'm being assaulted by these guys. Why are you touching me? I'm not touching you.
The Resnicks are nature killers. They kill fish and drain rivers.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, your co-host, your life co-host, and the Russians podcast co-host.
Yeah.
Zhenya.
We had Yeah, Evgenia. Yeah.
Yeah.
Giving him hell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so yeah, you guys were ahead of the curve. Congrats
Yeah.
on that.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, we're almost there. We're trying to strategize distribution, and it was sort of, we're getting the ball rolling. So it's been many years in the making, this film, but it's finally going to be seen. So I'm very excited about it.
Great, and we'll definitely have you back on to talk about it.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Yasha. And where
Thanks
can
a lot.
people find you?
Yeah, on my Substack, yasha.substack.com would probably be the best place to find me.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Yasha.
All right, talk soon. Have a great day.
You too. Bye. Okay, so we are so excited to keep this show going, and whether you're watching at Useful Idiots or the Katie Halper Show, please make sure that you give it a like, give it a thumbs up. That helps the algorithm so we can beat the podcast bros, for instance. We're going to bring in our next guests. Very excited to bring them in. They're both human rights and environmental lawyers. We are bringing on none other than, for the first time actually making her Katie Halper Show debut, is Natali Segovia, who is an international human rights attorney who currently serves as executive director of the Water Protector Legal Collective. And she, over the past 15 years, her international work has focused on addressing human rights violations as a result of extractive industry and mass development projects in rural, unseen areas in countries including Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil. And we are also bringing on Stephen Donziger, who is a human rights and environmental lawyer who was in prison for successfully suing Chevron for poisoning the water in the Ecuadorian Amazon. The prosecution of Stephen Donziger, which has been condemned by the United Nations, Greenpeace, and Amnesty International, Amazon Watch, and 64 Nobel laureates, was a literal corporate prosecution. Okay, so we are going to bring them on. Natali and Stephen, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks. So I wanted to start off, Stephen, you said directly on Instagram that this is, this is not a natural crisis. You said the fires devastating Los Angeles are not a natural disaster. They are a function of man-made climate change caused largely by the fossil fuel industry. And you refer to California suing the industry and its lobbying arm to recover massive costs of climate change. So can you talk about this case in California, and can both you and Natali talk about how this is a function of man-made climate change, largely caused by the fossil fuel industry?
Sure. I'll go first, I guess, and I'll try to be brief. I mean, we have to sort of stop seeing these cataclysmic weather events as the product of nature, and start understanding clearly that they are a function largely of what we have done, what man has done, women have done, what the fossil fuel industry has done to heat up the planet. I mean, there's always been fires in California. There has never been fires like this. And it's largely a function, scientists say, of the fact the planet has gotten warmer, weather has gotten more extreme, vegetation, in the case of LA around Los Angeles, has gotten thicker because the wet periods are wetter and it causes more vegetation to grow, and then drought comes and there's more brush to burn. The winds are higher, and you are now seeing an absolutely cataclysmic event. I don't think people understand yet how bad this is, the LA fires. My gut is this is going to completely change LA. It's never going to be the same. I don't see how these communities like Pacific Palisades, Malibu, ever get rebuilt. I don't know how you rebuild there, because this is probably going to happen again and again and again until we deal with the fundamental root causes of climate change. And as Peter Kalmus, my friend, the scientist, wrote in the New York Times today, these cataclysmic climate events always seem to arrive ahead of schedule. People are like, we have until 2030, we have until 2040, we have until 2050. We don't have any more time. It's here. And it is causing apocalyptic events, not just here in the United States, but all over the world. These events do not discriminate against anybody. They happen in all sorts of neighborhoods, wealthy neighborhoods, middle-class neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods. Everyone is affected, and it just astounds me that we have let the situation get this bad. And on top of that, we have a man coming into office now in the United States who thinks it's all a hoax, who's basically a chaos agent. And, you know, we get a wholesale assault not only on sort of the idea of science and climate science generating real solutions to this problem, but we get a wholesale assault on the very notion of human rights. And you know, you mentioned in your previous segment about the House vote yesterday to go out. All combined create a situation that honestly is the worst I've ever seen. And I've been fighting for justice for decades. I'm 63 years old. I voted in 11 presidential elections, and we are not in a good situation. It's really distressing.
Right. Now, Natalie, I'm going to go to you, but while I'm doing that, Stephen, we're going to, okay. I was going to say, Stephen, can you try to, or Brad, did you already? No. Okay. Going to say, Stephen, if you can try to flip your phone so it's in, what's it called? What mode? And Brad, maybe take him off so people aren't looking at this big black ugly thing. Landscape mode instead of portrait mode. Okay. Natalie, please, sorry for that technical interruption, but what's your
thanks,
response to that?
Katie.
Of course, yeah.
Well, I agree with Stephen here. I think.
Oh, and I'm sorry. This is the second time you came on the show. My apologies. Yeah, this is the first time you've come on to as in your full multitude.
In my full capacity.
Yeah,
that's
capacity.
right.
Yeah.
So, but in my work at the Water Protector Legal Collective, we started as a small organization at Standing Rock and have grown since then, but really trying to protect the water, right, and protecting the earth. So part of the view that we bring to human rights, the human rights arena as Indigenous attorneys and human rights attorneys, is looking at climate change from a holistic perspective, right? And that has to implicate an analysis of colonialism. It has to implicate an analysis of rampant capitalism as part of the root, or as the root of today's wildfire crisis, right? And when we talk about climate change, we tend to use actually the word climate disruption. I prefer the term because I think it's more honest. I think it talks about the fact that as humans, right, and as our role as individuals, as humans within, and of course the corporate industries, right, the fossil fuel industry in particular, and how these have fueled climate disruption. That is definitely something that is man-made. It is fueled by exactly the things and the choices that we have made as a society collectively. So very recently, for instance, we know now that there has been knowledge for a long time in the fossil fuel industry that their industry, is a major exacerbator of climate change. And just like the tobacco industry knew that nicotine causes cancer. So these are it's information coming from leaked memos from major oil companies like Exxon from the 1970s and 1980s that showed that they were aware that fossil fuels contribute to global warming and chose to suppress this information to protect profits. I was at Climate Week New York City this past year and attended a forum on water. And this summit, at this water summit, what they were talking about was the privatization of water as the solution to our water crises and to climate change. And basically what they were talking about was the corporatization of water stewardship. And so what we're talking about here, in the context of the LA fires is that capital and corporate industry and interests up against traditional indigenous land stewardship practices that included things like controlled fire burning practices, and then also water stewardship, right? What does that actually look like? And so when we are talking about what we're seeing in California right now, I mean, it's a devastating. It's devastating for everyone, as Stephen said. You talked about it being a great equalizer, But we can't negate that it also primarily affects Black and Brown people in places like Pasadena and Altadena.
Altadena, right? Yeah.
And
just to clarify, I think
yeah.
I did say this, but I maybe I wasn't clear enough, because it's a great equalizer in some ways, right? In that no one is safe, but obviously if you are someone with resources, you can flee, right? You can go somewhere else. Like I know people who are with their, going to another state, going to another city. Obviously, if you lose everything, but you're poor, it's a lot harder than if you lose everything and you're not poor. And of course, as people know, and you just pointed to, there's a intersection between race and class, obviously. But yeah, sorry, I cut you off. I just wanted to clarify that part.
Yeah, and I think your previous speaker Yasha was also talking about the Resnicks, and we're not talking about the Maui fires in Hawaii, but we're in terms of corporate and private holdings of water, that is a huge issue, right? The West Maui Land Corporation is a major real estate holding company in Maui that restricted access to water during the Lahaina fires and exacerbated the devastation in the region. So like the Resnicks, we're seeing a parallel in terms of private holdings of water and how privatization and access to water is a major issue that we've been talking about in the Southwest for a very long time, is talked about in regions that are, water scarce. But it hasn't been a major policy point. And, I think we have to start breaking away from that again. The 1970s, when the majority of our environmental laws were brought into the fabric of the legal system in the United States, it was largely a bipartisan effort. It was both Republicans and Democrats working together across the aisle, recognizing things like, the 1960s book from Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, that things in our water are not helpful, that this is it's a resource, right? It's a sacred resource. Water is life, right? It's more than just the motto or this term. It's a reality. In order to actually safeguard it, we have to work across those party lines. And so at some point, climate change began and climate disruption became politicized, and it shouldn't be that.
Right. Yeah. And you brought up the fact that this is an issue of like racial justice, right? And I wanted to show a clip, and trigger warning. This is like really, this is total, anti-woke, ignorant idiocy. But I think it's important because much as the narrative of, oh, this is not climate change or climate disruption. And by the way, I think that's a really important point that you just made, because I do think, language obviously really matters. And when you say climate change, it makes it sound like a natural process. Climate disruption really speaks to how it's like unnatural, anti-natural in some ways. So I'm going to just show you or share with people this ridiculous clip from, let's see, where is this? Sorry, where is this? Sorry, I have too many things. 1 second. From Fox News, obviously. Okay, so here is a Jesse Waters video. Because, we should say that in, to his credit, there's not a lot of stuff to credit him for, but in June 2024, Gavin Newsom did return 2,800 acres of Shasta Indian land previously stolen and flooded by a hydroelectric dam to the Shasta people, while also unblocking 4 of the dams and allowing the river to flow freely again. But of course, we're going to see Fox News manages to blame land back and Native Americans for the LA fires. So let's take a listen.
Before Donald Trump left office, he signed an order that would funnel more water from Northern California into Southern California. Newsom, instead of saying thank you, filed a lawsuit to stop it, saying it would kill the smelt. If you don't know what a smelt is, neither did we. It's a fish the size of your pinky. California can't get enough water to fight fires because of a stupid fish. We're saving fish instead of people. Saving smelt, big business. If anything happens to the smelt, people lose a lot of money. We're paying people to feel like heroes for protecting a fish no one eats. But it gets worse. Gavin's been tearing down dams. Why? Because the Indians wanted some of their river back so they could catch salmon. Gavin didn't just knock down one dam for the Indians, he knocked down all 4.
the largest dam removal project in U.S. history and one of the most significant, if not the most significant, water restoration projects, bringing back salmon and steelhead into this basin. And I couldn't be more proud as a father, because my kids and their great-great-grandkids will have the opportunity to see something that, well, has been here since time immemorial, and it's about damn time. Words mean nothing unless you can manifest them. You got to make something real. You got to make the words visible. We mean business. We're going to be turning this over in a very short period of time.
And these dams were a go-to source for firefighters to pull water from to fight fires up north. Gavin's literally tearing down Western civilization for fish and Indians. Nothing against the Indians. I love the Indians. But really?
Some of his best friends are the Indians, I'm sure. So can you respond to this, disgusting misinformation?
I mean, to ever suggest, right, that Indians, right, or indigenous peoples to the land that have been stewarding the land, using land management and water management practices, including controlled burns for, since time immemorial, are in any way responsible, for the fires is just beyond me. There was a statement actually by the Gabriela Band of Mission Indians Nation, and I think they talk about the importance that we have to recenter as humanity, but also recognizing that it says, as Indigenous stewards of these lands, we deeply feel the connection between the natural world and the message it carries. The winds and fires that recently swept through our homelands are a sobering reminder of the Creator's presence and the balance that must be maintained between humanity and the earth. These events remind us that the earth is alive and its voice grows louder when humanity strays from its responsibility to protect, nurture, and respect life. It goes on, but says we must take this moment as a moment of reflection and a call to action to restore harmony, to honor the earth, to renew compassion for one another, and work towards a world guided by respect, peace, and unity. And as Indigenous peoples in the ancestral tribe of the greater Los Angeles Basin, we stand as reminders of the sacred bond between humanity and the earth, urging all to listen to these signs, and act with the wisdom and humility the Creator has always intended for us. Aho. So I wanted to share that because I think there are really important Indigenous narratives and voices that are speaking out against this kind of misinformation and, frankly, malinformation, right, causing actual harm. And again, it's part of the colonial tapestry that is so woven into American society. And, we haven't talked about it, but even the Tasmanian blue gum, right? It's an invasive species in California that is highly flammable, containing a high amount of oil in their leaves. But it has long been seen as a symbol of colonial hegemony, and it's been planted in places like Lebanon and Palestine. But eucalyptus symbolized that hegemony for colonial administrators who could reach, right, from the British, who could reach into outposts and bring back new plants for public approval. So this is part of that assertion of colonialism and rampant capitalism that these fires are serving on us, courtesy of the fossil fuel industry like Exxon and Chevron.
Right. Yeah. There is it is a disgusting thing to not only kind of ignore the root causes of something, but also attribute the blame in a kind of an inverse way. It's not just like that they're blaming the wrong people in a more general sense, but they're blaming precisely the wrong people, like the people who they should be focusing on as being helpful. They're portraying as the villains.
Great.
And I want to ask you if you could expand on this, on the way that there is so much, I forget the term, it's not indigenous knowledge, but
traditional ecological knowledge.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And how that and indigenous stewardship practices, and how they can actually help prevent the fires we're seeing today.
Right. So traditionally in California, and this has been brought up every time there's a wildfire in California. So actually, if you Google, traditional land stewardship practices by indigenous peoples in the California area, several years ago, there was talk about the Yurok tribe and how they have been clearing forests and using controlled burns. But the idea of a controlled burn, which is used globally. It's not just California tribes have been using this. This is, has been used by many, many, many indigenous peoples across the world. The idea behind controlled burns is that it reduces the amount of, especially dry, right, overly dry, things that are no longer necessary, and it creates like an actually soil rich, like a richness in soil. But it helps so that eventually, right, when you have a really dry season, things like wildfires don't actually start because they have already been burned off. There's been an area of land that's been cleared using those controlled fire techniques. So it's something that was traditional but has been outlawed and banned in not just the United States, but in many, many places across the world. And it's part of that rejection, right, of traditional land stewardship practices and traditional ecological knowledge, as it's termed now, at least by the federal government and in kind of many federal policies. And I think there is a call back to reclamation of these practices, right? Because we're seeing that there's a lack of knowledge of, well, what do we do, right? These are corporate caused and corporate driven issues that we are seeing. But the holistic approach, right, this universal view of looking at water as a sacred resource, and also using fire as another important and also sacred part of these practices to be able to effectively manage these our traditional lands across the world are really important.
Right. And I don't know where Stephen is, but I did want to just ask if he's not here, maybe you could, I know you're active in his case. What is the latest with his, with Stephen's case? Can you just summarize it? And I know he's seeking a pardon, and what made you get involved in this case?
Yeah, so I've known Stephen for years. I do think he's back
okay.
already. But I've known Stephen for years, and I think one of the things that I see, and was working with Stephen and helping him even before I met him personally. But I'll share something about Stephen as a person that, as an Indigenous woman, really made me want to continue to be his ally and his friend and his attorney. And when I first met Stephen, the movie that came out, right, that had been like the main case about him was the Crude documentary, and it's been spun in such a way by Chevron in particular. And for those that don't know, right, Stephen is this human rights attorney that worked and went down over 250 times to the Ecuadorian Amazon, worked with over 30,000 indigenous plaintiffs in the Ecuadorian Amazon that were affected by 16 million gallons that were spilled in the Amazon by Chevron, then Texaco, and Chevron packed up and left. And as a result, Chevron persecuted and prosecuted Stephen, and it led to his eventual disbarment. And a criminal conviction because he refused to hand over his personal, attorney-client privileged communications to Chevron. So this was the first corporate sponsored prosecution in the United States of a human rights attorney. We have not seen this. It's unprecedented. But when I met Stephen, a lot of the demonization campaign of Chevron and others has been that he, kind of fabricated the case in Ecuador, that he was this like mastermind behind the indigenous people and used indigenous peoples, to kind of shape that narrative. And, in my first conversation with Stephen in person, I kind of asked him, I was like, if you could look back at, what have you learned? And what came back was a response that was so human and so humble, and just such an honest and genuine response that it will always stay with me. And he said, of course, he was a Harvard trained attorney. He's like, I went down to Ecuador believing that we could change the world, and knowing and being told that that was our responsibility. But what I've learned has been, even more, I learned even more from what indigenous peoples of the Ecuadorian Amazon taught me than I could ever impart on them. And that devotion to the underlying issue that goes beyond Stephen, right, and is a larger issue of corporate accountability and corporate visibility of malfeasance, environmental malfeasance in areas that are completely invisible and completely unseen, is a reason I will always stand with Stephen. So I'm grateful for him. We are continuing to work on his pardon. Biden has a few days left in office. There have been over 34 senators that have called for Stephen's pardon and release. Well, he's been released. Luckily, he was released.
Right.
But he still he doesn't have his passport yet. I mean, there's a lot of things that have been continue to affect his life and his ability to work as a human rights attorney. So that's what we're fighting for, and hopefully, Biden can make a change in these last few days of office. There are some people that really need the pardon. Stephen's one of them. Leonard Peltier is another.
Yeah, Mumia Abu-Jamal. He literally commuted the sentence of a cash for kids judge, someone who literally was paid to lock kids up. And if he did that, I think he can find it in his heart to pardon Stephen Donziger, who has the support of so many people, including yourself, and whose crime was successfully suing Chevron. We've covered this a lot on the show because it's just a disgusting case of corporate intervention in justice. Natali, thank you so much for joining. Where can people find you and your work?
They can find us on Water Protector Legal on Instagram, on Facebook, online, waterprotectorlegal.org.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, and would love to have you back on to talk about what you're doing. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye. We're going to keep this show going. But guys, I got to say, Katie Halper Show viewers, this is kind of shameful. Useful Idiots viewers do have you beat. They are liking this more than you are. So I really need you to come through and give it a thumbs up. Don't let the Katie Halper Show be shamed by Useful Idiots. Okay. So, this is an Aaron Mate approved live stream. Indeed. So we are going to bring on our next guest. So excited to have these guys back on the show. And that is Maegan Day, a writer, former staff writer at Jacobin, current editor at Jacobin, and Josh Olson, an Oscar-nominated screenwriter and co-host of The Audit, as well as West Wing Thing. And very relevantly, they are based in Los Angeles. So welcome, Maegan and Josh. Hi.
Hey,
thanks so much for joining.
Maegan.
Hey, what's up?
So, I want to start out by saying I'm sorry about what's happening. Can you share what you're observing and experiencing and what has happened to you and your friends and family?
Yeah, Josh, hit it.
Well, I know it's the Indians and the lesbians' fault. That's the
Right.
important thing. My wife and I live in the hills. By the way, I have to do this. I'm sure you made my main podcast, Movies That Made Me.
Okay.
We live in the hills. I could walk to the part of this, the Sunset Fire, the part that's going right now, and probably I could walk in 15 minutes driving to. And we have had our bags packed for the last day and a half, ready to go on the instant we get the word, and it's been horrific. I mean, I've literally lost count of how many people I know who've lost homes. Definitely lost count of the number of people I know who've been evacuated. We had friends and family in the Pacific Palisades, which is just absolutely devastated. I've got a friend in Altadena who, has no idea if he has a home now. It's just, I've never seen anything like this. I've been living here since the late 80s. The fires, floods, mudslides, earthquakes, the LA riots, like nothing has ever come close to this. It's, normally you can kind of sort of see even in the middle of it how we're going to kind of come back and what the various possibilities are. I don't know what LA is going to look like 5 years from now. And it's terrifying. And it's just, there's something truly surreal about walking through your home and trying to figure out what are the few things outside of, we've got a dog and a cat and a 2.5-year-old, and then, one suitcase to take some clothes and maybe 2 or 3 things that you can't live without ever. And it's a very cold equation to be kind of standing there looking at everything you've spent your life kind of, putting together and going, which of these can I fit in a suitcase and take with me? And,
how do you
we don't
explain
have
it to a 2-year-old?
We don't have to, thankfully.
Okay.
He's just under the age where he's
communicate.
yeah, and we're luckily in a slot like he's. I just came back from dropping him off at preschool this morning, and amazing teachers and a bunch of kids, and they're all sort of keeping him happy. Although yesterday I picked him up, and he did say fire is hot, and I don't know. Yeah, I know they're not sitting down and talking to the 2-year-olds about this, but he picked something up.
Right.
He doesn't actually know. He just knows that we might go to see his grandmother at any point in the next day or two.
Wow. And Megan, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I'm here in Atwater Village, which is kind of perfectly situated right between the Altadena fire and the Sunset fire. Like genuinely equidistant from the two. The bigger threat for us was the Altadena fire. We were watching all day as the evacuation zones kind of crept toward us through Pasadena and then through Glendale, and they stopped sort of just short of our house. And at some point it was like time to go to bed, and we were like, well, I mean, we packed a go bag. Like, we didn't know if we were going to get an alert in the middle of the night telling us to leave our home. We packed a go bag. We didn't identify our main items we said we were going to, and then it just felt too weird and sad, which if we had been evacuated, that would have been maybe a dumb decision, but it was kind of hard to keep our wits about us anyway, and we were exhausted from the day of trying to keep track of things, paying attention to the news. The air was incredibly thick with smoke above us. Where we live,
ashes,
kind of a valley, it's kind of a dip. We just live in a part of the city that actually is a little bit lower elevation in between these two fires, just kind of billowing smoke down onto us. So we were just kind of stayed inside, had to leave periodically to walk our dog, and otherwise not at all. Communicating with friends, trying to see who was getting out of town, where they were going, kind of planning routes ourselves for where we would go. And then woke up in the morning and still no evacuation orders. So that was good. We were like, okay. And the fires hadn't budged. The Sunset fire was contained. The one in Altadena, the Eaton fire, it was still going, but we'd had a sense that it wasn't going to come in our directions. So we just kind of decided to, I just got back to work at Jacobin, and I was editing a piece by also an Angelino, Ben Burgess, who happens to be in Mexico right now. So he's in Mexico, so he's a little less distracted. So he was able to write a piece on the fires. Right. So I was editing that piece yesterday from right in the middle of the kind of ring of fire. And the piece is up. If you want to look, if people want to go to Jacobin's homepage right now,
we'll
the
link
Los
to it.
Angeles fires didn't have to be this bad. And it's Ben's quick take on why this isn't necessarily just an act of God. I mean, yes, wildfires happen. Yes, wildfires predated austerity, privatization, neoliberalism, and so on, and climate change. But we know that those factors exacerbate the threats that are posed to humans and the scale of the fires. While I was editing that piece, I actually got an alert, as Josh probably also got. Did you get that alert?
The fake alert?
The fake alert. Every single person in Los Angeles County got an alert telling them to get ready to evacuate. 10 million people got an alert.
Your area is being evacuated.
Yeah, it was horrifying. And then 15 minutes later, they sent a follow-up that said, sorry,
I didn't get that.
Oh, really?
I honestly, if it had come after the Sunset fires had started, before they were contained, we would have been 5 miles away from our house before we kind of figured it out. But it literally spent the last couple of hours when it came watching all these reports of how they were actually letting people back into that area, and it's contained and it's all okay. And you're sitting there going, oh my God, thank God. And then you get this alert, and it was just I can't, this makes no sense. I was online, I'm looking, nobody on social media is leaving. There's no indication there's another fire near us. You're like, what is going on? And
it happens. Caused mass panic. My neighbor has a less than 1-year-old baby, and she was frantically packing up because of the alert. you know? And I ended up texting her and being like, hey, like I'm seeing reports on Twitter, which she's not using. I'm like, I'm seeing on reports on Twitter that it's false. So it was, for some reason, it's just chaos over here. I think that was just like an interesting, that was especially while I was editing the piece about the government's like municipal unpreparedness and just like general vibe of chaos, despite the fact that we live in a place where it is obvious that there are going to be horrific raging fires. We're always like, when's the next fire? When's the next earthquake? When are the next floods? Like you would think that there would be systems in place. That's sort of what the piece is about. That's what's been on my mind. And then we get this alert. Who pressed that button? What is going on over there?
I'll say my niece was in Hawaii. Remember when the bombs are coming, get out message got sent to everybody.
Right, yeah.
That would be worse. But yeah, this was jarring.
Well, speaking of the kind of human-made exacerbations of these crises, can you guys talk about that? And also about, you know, much has been made of the role of LA Mayor Karen Bass, who, along with the city council, recently approved a new budget that added $126 million in funding to the LAPD while simultaneously defunding the LAFD, the LA Fire Department,
here's the thing,
by
it's
$17.6 million approximately.
Except it kind of didn't. It's really frustrating because there's a ton of misinformation going on about this. And I spoke to a friend of mine recently who was used to be involved with the city council and had a whole conversation this morning. And I will simultaneously give with one hand and take away with the other. Karen Bass did not, and they didn't slash the budget. What happened is there were contract negotiations going on with the union. It's pure technicality. That amount of money was set aside into another fund. It was taken out of the budget, put into another fund while they did the contract negotiations, and then once they were resolved, it was put back in. It was just a bookkeeping technicality. Now, what the issue is, so it's like she's not.
So are you a bassist?
No, because I'm just like I'm a big fan of getting the facts right. Because if I'm gonna,
you're actually very critical of Bass. I've heard you.
Yeah, it's you know, I hate Donald Trump. I'm not a big Russiagate guy. It's like it blows people's minds. You know, get your facts right if you want to take these people down. What's appalling is you know, increasing the LAPD budget while the fire department budget has not increased in years, even though the population has and the danger has. And, you know, one of the things that just blows my mind as you sit here in the middle of it is like, you know, if we were fending off a Martian invasion right now and there wasn't enough money in the LA Martian invasion fund, you'd be like, yeah, we didn't really think that was ever going to happen. This happens every year. They keep increasing. Everybody knows it's going to happen. There's no deniability. You can't go, oh, we didn't see fires coming. And it's absolutely obscene that we don't have significantly more money in that budget. And the right, you know, the Ben Shapiros and everybody are making a huge meal of this, but they can't, you know, the real sin is we keep sending more and more money on the LAPD while not giving any more money to the fire department. And Ben Shapiro and those idiots can't say that. They can't go, oh, look, they keep giving money to the cops, because that's their bread and butter, is, you know, scaring you about looting gangs or whatever the hell. So it is a huge problem that nothing has been done, that the funding has not been increased, but it is not the fact that they slashed the LA fire department budget. And then, of course, the whole thing of like, you know, going after the DEI fire chief or whatever, like the fact that, you know, some of the people who are out there, my God, like going days and days without sleep, saving people's lives, saving people's homes, keeping us safer. You know, the fact that some of them might be lesbians or even, God forbid, transgender, like going after them for that is just one of the most despicable things I've ever seen.
Yeah, but I mean, is it we're supposed to believe it's a coincidence?
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. You know.
Yeah.
I think also, like, there's the bigger picture of austerity and the kind of austerity mindset that rules and governs California politics, Los Angeles County politics, Los Angeles politics, which is absolutely has a role to play in why we are perennially unprepared for the obvious and inevitable disasters that come our way. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, obviously right now, and I think Josh, you're responding to this a little bit, the right loves to say that Democrat-run cities are like hellholes, shitholes, they don't function, etc. Now, Josh and I and you, Katie, are all quite critical of Democrats. So I think we have our own reasons to say, like, well, yeah, they're not fucking great. But the right is coming at that from the angle of Republican-run states and cities are like perfectly functioning utopias, and Democrats are all doing wokeism and socialism, and that's why their cities are going to hell. And so that's why there's a lot of misinformation floating around right now, and that's why it's a little bit hard to parse it all out. But I feel like I want to split the baby and say, like, okay, like Republicans, stop listening. This is not for you. Everybody else, let's have a conversation. Yes, there is an austerity mindset. Yes, there is rampant privatization. Yes, there is an allergy to wealth redistribution in the form of progressive taxes, all of which, and there's just a general approach to urban planning that's completely insensitive to the realities of nature in California, which is driven by profit. It's just pure supply and demand instead of like safety. And all of that is true. And yes, the Democrats are at the helm of that. Now, broadening out the conversation to include the right, stop saying all this crazy bullshit. You guys are making this shit up.
Yeah. And of course, the irony is it actually helps the Dems, because then the Dems get to point to that and engage in this culture war discourse and not actually be held accountable in any real way.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, very much.
And I know that Maegan, you told me you are rereading Mike Davis right now. Can you talk about him and his writing and how that sheds light perhaps on what's happening?
Yeah, can I go on like a little monologue about my friend Mike Davis?
And not everyone knows who he is.
Let me explain. So Mike Davis is recently deceased giant of the American intellectual left and preeminent history of California, to my mind. One of I would say the top like 2 or 3 to anybody's mind of the late 20th and early 21st century, but also the best ambassador of leftist ideas in the discourse, in the game. He's wrote City of Quartz, which is kind of like the best, most dazzling and kaleidoscopic primer on Los Angeles, Southern California, and the kind of where the American dream goes to dazzle and die simultaneously. Our beautiful, perverted utopia, dystopia hybrid. That he's the guy that has like written the most about this. And I really wish that he were here right now for a lot of reasons. And but mainly just because I want to hear what he has to say about these fires. Like, I think because he has written a lot about disasters in California, in Southern California in particular, and humans' relationship to the land and the hubris and the blind ignorance that has gone into developing this place for profit, every square inch of it, while not totally recognizing the kind of dangerous miracle underneath our feet. Like, this is a very strange and particular climate. That's why people like it. That's why people come out here. But it's also a very fickle and very dangerous place to live. And it was sold to people, right? It was like, come out here to this beautiful, strange locale. It was packaged and sold as a commodity, and now it's sort of turning on us. So Mike Davis has written a lot about that, in particular in his book Ecology of Fear, Los Angeles and the Imagination of Disaster. Can you imagine a more perfect subtitle for this moment? I do think people should go, if they can, and pick up a copy of Ecology of Fear. Pretty much everything you need to know about how we got here is in that book, which was published in 1998. I did have an impulse to ask AI to like write the Mike Davis essay on the 2025 Los Angeles fires.
Oh wow, yeah, you should do that. See how it works.
I just really want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah.
So I want to explain. I want to share a little bit of what I've gotten out of this reread, because I think that he nailed it. Like, I think that he's given us so much to think about in this moment. So the first thing that he would tell you is that he likes to call Los Angeles or Southern California Walden Pond on LSD. The point being that we all came here supposedly for the nature, to appreciate it, to gaze upon it. And what we were treated to was a really kaleidoscopic trip, sometimes a really bad trip, sometimes a really beautiful trip. So this is Walden Pond on LSD. That's how we got Los Angeles. It was all about the nature. That was the original draw. That was the original packaged commodity. And, in 1934, like, I got this from his book, the LA Times actually was like, let me read the quote. "No place on earth offers greater security to life and greater freedom from natural disasters than Southern California." This was just like this was a story that Southern California was telling itself and telling the rest of the world about how it was Eden. It was paradise. Come here to live in paradise. It's always sunny. You're always safe. The nature is beautiful. That's a total bullshit. This is like a really crazy place to live. It's a Mediterranean climate, which clearly Southern California knows about itself, because if you look at the architecture, a lot of it is like Mediterranean revival, like that kind of like Orange County, like Newport Beach, like terracotta tiled roof house with the random assortment of misplaced, pointless arches and the slathered on like fake stucco and all of that, right? Clearly there's some reference to the fact that we live in a Mediterranean climate. The truth about a Mediterranean climate, though, it's actually the rarest like subclimate that there is. And also it's the most fickle, and it has a very specific way of functioning that makes it like really uninhabitable to human life, unless humans in Mediterranean climates have to have a lot of respect for nature and unique ways of dealing with nature, because we have dry vegetation up against the coast. So we have the wind from the coast, or we have the dry vegetation and the winds, and then the winds come back down, and then there's the rain and the floods, and it's like kind of a crazy cycle out here in Mediterranean climates. And so actually my little summary there sucked a lot, but I'm going to go ahead and read this cycle to you out loud, because I think it's important for people to think about. And this is not from Mike Davis, this is from somewhere else. Mediterranean climates create a precarious environment for human settlement due to an inherently unstable cycle. Long, dry summers allow vegetation to become extremely desiccated, while also growing abundantly due to mild temperatures, creating intense fire risk from naturally oil-rich, drought-adapted plants. When fires inevitably occur, they denude the landscape just before the wet season arrives, with concentrated bursts of winter rainfall. These rains then hit the bare, hydrophobic soils, triggering flash floods, debris flows, and massive erosion events, which further destabilize the landscape for the next cycle. Human settlement patterns often exacerbate these natural instabilities through fire suppression, which leads to fuel accumulation, building on steep slopes. Also, humans build on steep slopes and in canyons, increasing landslides and debris flow risk, and creating artificial irrigation patterns that can't sustain themselves naturally, all of which intensify the destructive potential of this natural cycle. That's a quote, end quote. And also, by the way, we're in an earthquake zone. So like add all of that together. Maegan, why do you live here? Well, just like everybody else, it's the weather, baby. Like, honestly, the weather is delightful. So Mike Davis calls this the disaster algorithm. And there's just kind of a failure to understand how like astonishingly fickle Mediterranean climates actually are, which coupled with capitalism has led to a particular development pattern in the region. So this is the most overdeveloped, least sustainable Mediterranean climate in the world. We have just basically one unified subdivision, which was built without a single care in the world to things like natural native plant fire barriers, to like reserve, water storage for defensive, fire use, like firefighting. We don't clear out the chaparral, and we also suppress fires. So we don't clear out the brush. Well, we don't do it as much as we should. And we also say no fires, no fires anywhere, which means that the brush can't burn, which means that the brush is accumulating, which means that there's fuel everywhere. It's a tinderbox. And that's because humans live here and don't want, and don't let the natural fire cycles do their thing. So, and then meanwhile, we just build all of these homes, like one after the other, row after row, cul-de-sac after cul-de-sac, made of materials that are just easy to go up in flames. And also, people just don't have a respect, I think, out here for how unusual our environment is. Like Mike Davis talks about how imaginary norms and averages are constantly being invoked, and we're always like, it's not raining as much this year, or like kind of dry this year. It's like raining a lot this year, or the winds are pretty strong this year, or no winds this year. And the truth of the matter is that that's every year. He said there's nothing less likely to happen than quote unquote average rainfall. in California. It's not, there are no averages. It's crazy year after year, and even decade after decade, and even century after century. So like if you look into medieval times, there were mega droughts here, and the entire environment adapted around the fact that there was just not a lot of rainfall. That could absolutely happen again, because it's a very, very fine and complicated algorithm. So we've built this place that's meant to, you know, exist for humans, and we haven't been building it in view of the peculiarity and fickleness of the environment that we're in. We've also been building on a really short timeline. He wrote, if there has been one single fatal flaw in the design of Southern California as a civilization, it has been the decision to base the safety of present and future generations almost entirely upon short-sighted extrapolations from the disaster record of the past half century. And then if you add into that climate change, and how we know that climates are going to change, and we are in an incredibly volatile place to begin with, it just doesn't make
climate
sense.
disruption, as Natali Segovia, an earlier guest, said. She prefers the term climate disruption.
I like that too. It's active,
right?
Absolutely,
Yeah, exactly, and it doesn't sound natural and inevitable.
100%. So yeah, I also wanted to, like, I just want to say at the end of this that, like, okay, so people live here though. So like everything that I just said about how it like doesn't make sense to live here, that doesn't matter. We live here. Josh lives here. I live here. I like living here. We're going to stay here. People are going to stay here. So what do we have to do? Josh is like, oh yeah, I forgot. Josh, you're trying to go to Ireland. Is that right?
Somewhere. We're thinking about it.
Wow. He's got plans. The man's on the move. Okay, so I'm staying here for whatever reasons. Hard to say. And how do we actually deal with it? I mean, we can't scrap the whole thing and start over, though. Yeah. That would be probably the best thing to do. But what we have to do is get out of a mindset of austerity and privatization, because the big problem is that the planning and development of this whole region has been plotted according to who has the money, who has the capital, who builds stuff, who has the money to buy it, where there's a good spot to buy and build. Like it's just pure supply and demand. It's just the pure workings of commerce, and not like rational decisions. Go ahead, Josh.
I have a question for you, because I'm sort of, you know, what are your thoughts, like, watching this happen? The number of, first of all, I want to say one of the frustrating things is the way that this is being portrayed to the world is that it is just like, you know, rich dickheads living in the hills who work in the movie industry. Which, at least I'm a dickhead living in the hills. I don't know if I'm rich, but there's an awful lot of like poor working people. I mean, it's you know, Altadena is not Beverly Hills, folks, and
it's not very white, right?
Yeah. And but that aside, the fact that there are an extraordinary number of extremely wealthy people, like, I mean, Pacific Palisades is, you know, a very, very, very wealthy area. There's a lot of people there who have lost their homes. Their insurance is for sure going to default. Companies are going to go bankrupt. This is going to radicalize some people, I think, some of those people. Yeah. And I think some of them might be radicalized in the right direction. Do you think I'm being optimistic there?
No, I think that's possible. Here, let's put it this way. People in wealthy enclaves in Southern California are very resistant to progressive taxation efforts.
Right.
At this particular moment, do we think that if you polled them and asked them, would they be willing to pay higher taxes for better public services and better, you know, interventions, like planning interventions, you know, firefighting, like budgets, like all of the things that we need to do to get prepared for the next disaster? Do you think they'd be willing to say yes? Yeah, I think that they would. It's well, it should be noted that
everybody mentioned this. They're in the middle of negotiating the next budget in this city, so this is a good time for those people and anybody to pick up the phone and harangue your representatives.
I mean, the thing is, like, we can't scrap this whole place and start over, but we can actually do a lot of things that will make it it doesn't have to be like this every single time, you know? And what it takes is money. It takes money. And guess what? We have it. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. The total amount of private wealth held in Los Angeles County is like $30 trillion. It's larger than most countries. We have the money here. It's within the borders of our county. It requires progressive taxation and redistribution and public funding in public services, public intervention, public planning. We need to use our public money to keep ourselves safe. Basically, if we want to keep living here, if we want to keep living in Los Angeles, we have to pay for the privilege, or especially the wealthy have to pay for the privilege. Like, we all have to pitch in according to what we can in order to ensure that we get to stay here. And I like it here. So I'm a fan of this idea. Now, I want to also add to your point about Altadena. Yeah, like, to the West Side point, the Palisades point, I want to say that when this happened and when there were floods out there in like the 90s, there was some LA Times writer who speculated like maybe God is punishing us for making all those dirty movies.
Oh yeah.
I think we should consider that.
Yeah, definitely worth bearing in mind. Yeah.
But actually though, I mean, the devastation in Altadena has been enormous. Altadena is a working class, mostly non-white exurb. And I know that I have more connections out to Altadena than in the Palisades. And I think that people are very like, I saw an article about like Paris Hilton's home going up in flames, but like, there's not going to be an article about my wife's brother's girlfriend's house that she grew up in, where her grandparents still live, who are in their 80s, who don't know where they're going to go, going up in flames. It's all completely gone.
And she can't afford just to buy another one.
No, she can't afford to buy another one. And she's in her 80s. Like, what are they going to do? And then, you know, so my wife is a member of the teachers union, and she's a leader in the North Area chapter, which sort of stretches northward. So a lot of people who work in the public schools in LA live out in that area. It's not easy to afford life in LA. So a lot of them live up in Altadena and Pasadena. And there have been so many public school teachers in the north area of UTLA, that is the northern part of LAUSD, who have lost their homes entirely, including her coworker, who has 2 children, ages 1 and 3, and was able to take 2 bags of essentials. And there's so many of them that Hannah's compiling a list of GoFundMes just for public teachers who've lost their homes. So no, this is not about, you know, like just like rich movie biz people, though also those people don't deserve to have their homes ripped from them. Like, seriously, not even Paris Hilton, you know, like this is not good. This is not a good thing that we should be cheering on, or that anybody should be cheering on. It's devastation, genuinely.
James Woods.
I mean, the only thing that's like potential silver lining. Well, I don't know. Yeah, the potential silver lining, right, is that you'll have wealthy people who will have buy-in with, as you were saying, with raising taxes, paying more taxes. Yeah.
If they learn from it, though, I will say that in the 90s, and granted there were a few, and Josh is right, they could. This is an interesting thing though. In the 90s, which Josh lived through, there was like a lot of disaster. There was like a cycle of disasters. It wasn't there were fires in 93, but I think there was just a lot of other shit. There was like earthquakes and floods.
I had a friend who moved out here, I think I can't remember if it was 92 or 93. And by the time he'd been here a year, he'd been through major earthquakes, the LA riots, huge fire. I mean, it was crazy. He was like a native.
Yeah, it was like a mega disaster cycle, which is also to Mike Davis's point about how it's not stable year after year. It's not even stable decade after decade. It's not even stable half century after half century. Like you have to go deep into the climate science and the geography and the geology and the, you know, ecology to understand what's happening here and what's likely to happen. Anyway, so 500,000 people left the city in the 90s, most of them rich. It was like a white flight thing, a kind of belated white flight thing. I mean, obviously the riots had a lot to do with that. And just the general sense that, you know, LA was gangland or whatever, this idea that it was sort of being overrun with like dangerous people of color, but also the disasters. People didn't want to deal with, you know, potential like losses, and it seemed.
But the potential is the thing, because things like the Northridge quake, that is not a rich neighborhood. You know, there've always been big mudslides and things in Malibu, but this is the first time you've seen an incredibly wealthy community just wiped out. In the past, it was people going, "This might happen. I'm getting out," and now it's like you're on the receiving end of it, and you know, I think that's the difference.
I mean, it's an irony that the people, because they want to be in like the most naturally beautiful places, because they're like most, and they can, who doesn't, but they have the money to do it. It
Right.
means that they're up around all of that fuel that I was talking about, the over accumulated chaparral. That's what they want to live in. That's the most desirable place to live. And the fact that it doesn't happen every time to the rich is just because we have a lot of shit going on here and a lot of inputs going on in the algorithm. But it's also, if you strip that away, it's an inevitability that the places where the rich are choosing to live are the places that are the most, it's inevitable that there are going to be massive wildfires and massive mudslides in those places. Now, when I say it's inevitable, I don't mean the devastation is inevitable. I mean, the fires are inevitable.
Right.
The devastation is not inevitable. There are lots of things that you can do. They just take public money to actually do them. I had this little list of things. I just want to like point out a couple of them, things that can actually happen that take money. So, like green fire breaks is an idea that people have. Basically, it's like combining drought tolerance with fire resistance by creating like succulent rich native plant communities, it putting them all throughout the urban environment so that they are like a natural green firewall that breaks up fires. That's a great idea. That's possible with public money. It's completely possible with public money. What you got to do is you got to have people who don't want their homes to burn down to agree to pay more taxes to build things like that, and then their homes will be safe, and the rest of us will be safer too. It kind of speaks to like, you know, our general idea on the left that like it literally benefits all of us if everyone can pitch in. Like we have to have solidarity, we have to come together and pool our resources in order to have the maximum quality of life. Like yes,
this is one of those examples, right? That like proves that
Exactly.
individualism doesn't work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and you kind of have to stop. I mean, it's crazy thing. It's like every, you know, the response to any kind of attempt to do that is always like, but it's so expensive. Well, yeah.
Right.
Now,
what about this?
What about this?
What about this being like financially expensive and also life depriving, the expense of losing your life or your home?
Somewhere down the line, we're going to hear a number, and that number is going to be the cost of these fires when it's over, and that number is going to be bigger than anything you've ever. I mean, it's going to blow.
It's going to be the most expensive disaster in. It's going to be the most expensive disaster in recent living LA history for sure, because of the price of the homes that evaporated one after the other, row after row of multi-million-dollar homes out in the Palisades, and then the devastation in Altadena was enormous too. Those homes are not particularly expensive, but they also, it's California, so they're like they are, you know.
Yeah. And just do we have a minute, Katie? Or
and then David Sirota is here, so we're gonna bring him on. But if you want to make a final point.
Yeah, just there's a whole thing that's happening, and it's crazy. I'm watching like all these Democratic pundits kind of turning into the NRA as they're like you know, I saw one of the Pod Save idiots, that politics girl person, and they're all like, this isn't political. Stop trying to make it political, which you're like, you guys sound just like the NRA.
Right, I see what you're saying with NRA. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it's like, no, this is political. What you're saying, you're trying to get us not to think about it in partisan terms. You know, because it is bipartisan. It is bipartisan, and it is political, and both parties are equally culpable in this. And it's just grotesque watching them try to sort of go like, don't talk about that right now. It's like, when can we talk about it? Because if we had talked about this 20 years ago, you know, I wouldn't be looking at the most important things that I own sitting there in a bag, getting ready to go out the door.
Right.
I mean, it's political in the sense that, like, okay, so I want to say one thing real quick about just the role of like austerity and privatization broadly, which the Democratic Party has been at the helm of, because the Democratic Party is in charge of all of this. And that doesn't mean that the Republicans wouldn't also be going whole, you know, of course, the Republicans, there's what's the quote? The Democratic Party is the history's second most enthusiastic party of capital. Well, that means the Republicans are number one. So we do not know what, if any, role PG&E played in this fire. So I'm not going to speculate on that.
And can you tell people what PG&E is?
Yeah. So most of California's energy supply is provided by a for-profit company called PG&E. And in 2018, PG&E was directly responsible for the Camp Fire, which you may have heard of, which had a death toll of 85 up somewhere in like Northern California. Which actually had a smaller acreage loss than this fire by like a long shot. It just had a higher death toll. So because evacuation was less possible because it was a rural area. So I'm not saying that PG&E is responsible for this fire. I literally have no idea, but I know that people have been warning that if you let PG&E continue to be in charge of the infrastructure and continue to cut corners for profit, then we're going to continue to have problems in California with fires because they don't rehab their infrastructure. They don't take care of their power lines. They do all these things that just put people in the line of fire because it's just less expensive and they get to make higher profits for their shareholders. And after the Camp Fire, there was a big push to to socialize, to take over, for the state to take over PG&E. It's not a crazy idea. States can provide energy. It happens actually a lot. Like, it's a thing that can totally happen. And this was really legitimized because of that disaster, with even at that time sitting Congressman Ro Khanna was calling for a state takeover of PG&E. This was not like a fringe, crazy, radical idea. People were really mad and they were like, that's it, you're done. Well, California, which means the Democratic Party in California, decided instead to just wag their finger and impose fines and regulations. Now, I have no idea if PG&E had anything to do with this fire, but it's definitely going to have something to do with another fire. And this is an example of how the Democratic Party in California doesn't go out of its way to do something that would upset donors, that would upset rich people, but would actually ensure the safety of all people. Like, if we had political leadership that was really, really dedicated to safety instead of sort of a split allegiance, also dedicated to preserving the profits and the private wealth of wealthy people in the state, then we would all be safer. So yeah, it's political in that sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. We'll link to your various endeavors. And as always, great to hear from both of you.
Yeah, so good to come on. Good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's been years, Maegan. Okay, thanks so much. And we're going to bring on our last guest, but certainly not least, and that is none other than David Sirota, who is, as people probably know, an award-winning journalist and best-selling author living in Denver, Colorado. He was nominated for an Academy Award for his work helping Adam McKay create the story for the blockbuster film Don't Look Up, and he is founder and editor of The Lever. Welcome, David.
Hey, Katie. How you doing?
Good, thanks. You?
Good.
So what is the major takeaway from what is happening right now, and how is this a question of policy as opposed to just natural disaster, which is, what we're seeing from most of the media coverage?
Well, I think that the takeaway is that this was entirely predictable, but that also that we have to recognize it for what it is, which is it's something different. It's an escalation. I mean, this is an urban wildfire, and I think we actually have to process that as something new, at least new in the last 150 years. I mean, there have been fires in cities in the past 150 years, but you really have to go all the way back to the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 to really understand what we're now dealing with. And so I think that is new, and that's what makes this stand out, I think, from past fires. I mean, I'm talking to you from Denver, Colorado. Only a few years ago, there was the Boulder Fire, which was a huge fire for our state, our community. But the Boulder Fire was, in many ways, a suburban, or at least in the wildland-urban interface area. The fire breaching into a more densely populated area in California, that's something new and different and should terrify everybody, in the sense that we are back to an era where I think we have to be really afraid of, mindful, and preparing for fire in a way that I think our culture and our society has forgotten how to do. I mean, I can remember my own grandparents having somewhat of a fear of fire because they came from the old country where 100 years ago, where fires were seen as a real threat in daily life. And I think for generations we've kind of forgotten that. In some ways, there's a silver lining to forgetting that, as we forgot it because we figured out how to deal with it. Right. As a society.
I'm so sorry, David. Is there any way you could raise the gain on your microphone a little bit?
Oh, sure.
I think that it's a little low.
Sure. Here, how's that? Better?
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a lot better. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So I think I think that we have to internalize the idea that fire is back in our cities and in our suburbs, and not just in Los Angeles, but in so many other places. So I think that's that's one of the things that's different about this. And I think clearly we have not made choices as a society and a culture to prepare for that, knowing that that's the threat. I mean, there's two sets of issues here. There's what are we doing to prevent fires generally vis-a-vis the climate crisis? And then what are we doing to protect against the fire danger that is now baked in? And I think California offers an example of, and frankly, it always kind of has, living in ecologically potentially not fully sustainable areas has always been California's brand, right? Since when they built LA in the first place, Southern California. So Southern California has always been kind of living on the edge. But I think we're in an era where making choices to live in these kinds of locales without policies put in place to require risk mitigation, really strict policies to require risk mitigation. I think that era, the fires are an example of what happens when you do that, when you add in the climate crisis to that already precarious situation. I guess the short way of putting it is if you're going to build a city in Southern California with or without the climate crisis, it's going to come with some peril in terms of water, in terms of forest management, in terms of fire dangers, the Santa Ana winds. But if you're then going to have that city exist knowing the climate crisis is incoming and is going to exacerbate the situation, and you're not going to put in place policies that really require a build out of real protection, you end up becoming a sitting duck to something like this. And I'm not obviously saying that this was completely inevitable. I mean, I think there's a confluence of a lot of things that happened here, a kind of perfect storm. But I think it's a wake-up call that many communities like Southern California exist, whether it's floods, fires, hurricanes. Many communities exist in areas that we know are susceptible to these kinds of dangers in the era of climate change. And it doesn't seem like we have yet taken seriously the idea that if these communities are going to exist there, that we need to, at minimum, separate from stopping the climate crisis when it comes to emissions and the like, which I obviously support, but we need to, at minimum, harden these areas and take seriously the kinds of things we need to do to prevent the inevitable disasters from getting completely out of control.
Right. So I actually want to bring something up, and this is not about like a social media war, but I think this exchange kind of captures an important analysis. You tweeted out. Sorry, let me just capture this. Where is this? You tweeted out the city of Los Angeles is a raging inferno. Less than 3 years after a bunch of elite pundits and film critics insisted "Don't Look Up" was too heavy-handed and too unsubtle about the climate crisis. And of course, you helped create "Don't Look Up." You tweeted it out. Then Tommy Veeder, who's from one of the Pod Save Boys and an Obama bro, tweeted a screenshot of that and said, "Cannot wrap my head around the narcissism required to tweet this out." Sorry, let me start that again. "Cannot wrap my head around the narcissism required to tweet this as the fires are still raging." And then you tweeted in response to that, David, "Cannot wrap my head around the narcissism of Obama bros who killed off real climate legislation, then built a media empire to mostly punch left, scoff at, eye roll, and ignore scientists, activists, and politicians who've allegedly been too on the nose in sounding the climate alarm." So can you talk about this, what you're saying here?
Sure. This is, I should have remembered that everything on social media is read in completely bad faith, taken out of context.
Well, not by me. I mean, I'm
not by you, not by you. No. But obviously what I was getting at was, look, whether you love or hate our particular movie, that's fine. It's a movie. A movie is not going to solve the climate crisis. You can think our movie was great, think it was funny, think it was bad, you can hate it. All that's fine. The point I was making is some of the criticism of Don't Look Up, and by the way, plenty of other films and cultural products that have tried to touch on the climate crisis. Underneath some of the criticism of the movie and of those cultural products is this is doomerism. This is too on the nose. It's not subtle enough. It's not sophisticated enough. It's not, it doesn't have a light enough touch. And my point was only that the climate crisis itself is not subtle. The climate crisis itself is very on the nose. The climate crisis itself is very, very in your face, as evidenced by what we are seeing in Los Angeles. So the point is that we have a problem in our culture where whenever anybody is blunt about the crisis that we face, there is an elite media class that is very quick to eye roll, to scoff, to sigh, to portray those sounding the alarm as fundamentally unserious, unhinged, hysterical, too on the nose, Debbie Downers. And my point is that that's part of the problem here. So again, I want to be really clear. This was, my tweet was not, it invoked my movie because I participated in that movie. And it's something that hundreds of millions of people saw. So I think it's something that people understand the reference to. It wasn't about, I want you to like my movie. I want you to go watch. I mean, hate the movie, love the movie. And social media, of course, is, Sirota's making it about his movie. I'm not making it about our movie. It's about the idea that whether you love or hate our movie, whether you love or hate a TV show, there was TV series about climate, documentaries, whether you love or hate particular cultural products, we need to stop scoffing and berating berating as too on the nose, as too doomer, those who are trying to sound the alarm. You may not like the way one particular movie or TV show or documentary portrays the alarm. You may not think it's very good. That's all fine. But the idea, the fundamental point here is we need to start saying, hey, we need more alarms sounded.
Right.
That we need more consciousness, cultural consciousness of the climate crisis. I mean, think about when you watch television. I'm writing a piece about this right now. Think about when you watch television or movies today. And not climate movies, just movies, TV shows, sitcoms, whatever you're watching.
Say Nothing right now is what I'm watching on Hulu
Great.
about the IRA. Yeah.
Great. I want people when they go and watch these shows and movies, I want you to take a moment as you're watching to look at the background setting that you're watching the film, that's portrayed on screen. I'm not saying whether you're, forget about watching a climate movie, right? Just a movie, TV show about anything else. Do you notice that the environmental and ecological setting that you're typically watching the film set in, that it doesn't really reflect the climate reality that we're living in? That it looks like that what you're watching is a climate and ecological reality from 20 years ago or 30 years ago, right? And I think about the movie Parasite, for those who've seen that movie. Great movie. Parasite is not a climate movie. It's not real. I mean, but the climate crisis is in that movie, right? There's constant rains. They're dealing with some flooding. But the flooding and the rains aren't necessarily a central part of the story. It's just the lived reality of people in that setting. And I guess what I'm getting at here is that we're still at a moment where the cultural products that are supposed to be reflecting back our world are not like Parasite. They're reflecting back a world that basically doesn't much exist anymore. And that's, I think, because there's a fear of being too on the nose. There's a fear of being, oh, you're being a doomer. There's a fear of reminding people of the reality in front of us. And my view is, even though, look, when I watch sitcoms and whatever, I don't want, doomerism, not doomerism, but I don't want, things that remind me of sad situations shoved in my face. But I also do want a reflection of reality.
Right.
And I this dissonance between what is portrayed as our world and what actually is our world is fundamentally a problem if what we need to be doing right now is to be out of the denial stage and into the acceptance and mitigation and protection and prevention stage. That if one of the central short-term problems is that we need to harden our cities, we need to change our zoning laws, we need to strengthen all the infrastructure, knowing that there is this incoming crisis, even if we do the best climate policies possible to reduce the long-term effects of that crisis, that short-term, we've got some big problems. If that is the fundamental short-term challenge right now, then pretending that world doesn't exist hurts our ability to get the political will to actually do what we need to do. Not just right now. We need to have done it yesterday. So we need to do it immediately.
Well, I guess, what makes this so, I think, interesting also is there's that side of it, right? But what about the other side of it, which is the role of Obama and the Obama bros in this disaster that we're currently experiencing?
Well, look.
Could you speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. Look, this is a sad story. The Obama administration did not take seriously at the level it needed to be taken seriously the climate crisis. And to be clear, obviously neither did the Bush administration.
Right.
Two oil guys running climate policy, right? So, but I think there's this clip that's online that you can find. It was actually in 2018, which actually makes it so much worse. It's so much worse that it was 2018. It's worse because it's so recent. This is, it's one thing to look back in the early 2000s. I worked in Montana politics. I worked in, right. I wasn't 100% right. I've written a couple things way back 25 years ago about, different ideas and, can we have an all of the above energy policy? That was 25 years ago. Right. You could argue there was some confusion. How do we move forward? 2018, there's no confusion, right? 2018, we're like, inconvenient truth has been made. There should be a full awareness of the fact that we have a much bigger emergency on our hands than many people understood, right? In 2018, Barack Obama was in Houston and bragged to it doesn't sound like I'm making this up. I want people to go look at it.
Yeah, we'll cut it in later. Yeah.
Yeah, like Barack Obama was in front of an audience in Houston and said essentially the record production of oil and gas happened under my term. That was me, people. And he was bragging about this. And that wasn't an anomaly.
It wasn't a mea culpa. It was
it was bragging. Yeah. And the thing is that you can go look back during his administration when he did a campaign event in Oklahoma bragging about this. So this wasn't out of character. And we could go through the policies that Obama did that were terrible for the climate. And to be clear, signing the Paris Accords, that it wasn't all 100% bad. That there were some good things, certainly better than some things better than the Bush administration for sure. So let's be painting a somewhat nuanced picture. But I think the point is that the Obama years, when he had a giant mandate for change, when he had massive congressional majorities, and they backed off, for instance, cap and trade. Again, not perfect, but they had a chance to do it. The Obama administration backed off it. The Democrats in Congress also helped kill it. The point is that the Obama administration, the people around Barack Obama, the people who have used their Obama administration experience to then build a media empire to punch essentially the left, sort of generally, and marginalize the left to a liberal audience, those people all have significant culpability in the climate crisis we're now living through. The Pod Save America guys should be apologizing to the world for what they participated in the Obama administration that helped create the crisis we're now in, at the admission of Barack Obama himself in 2018. And the reason to remind folks of this is, in my view, if people are not held accountable, and I don't mean like throwing them in jail or whatever, I'm saying if we're not aware of what decisions were made and who participated in creating the reality that we're in right now, it creates the conditions for continuing to repeat that behavior. We need to hold accountable and understand what brought us to this situation. And the people who participated in that should be saying, hey, we got it wrong. We understand that what we participated in was wrong and bad, and having learned that, we need to do new things, as opposed to pretending none of that happened. Now, again, we live in a goldfish culture where we forget our world every 15 minutes. I happen to have a photographic memory for things that I detest and am sad about. It's sort of a curse. But I guess the point is, we can't allow that to happen again. And I think that what we need to be doing is saying, here are the mistakes that we made. We must never make these mistakes again, or the Los Angeles fires are not a turning point. They end up being the first of a gateway into that being a new reality. And I don't think anybody wants that.
Right. Really quickly, David, because I know you have a ton of work to do. If you could just summarize, like, what needs to, I guess, what the failures are and what needs to happen. Like, what is the evidence for the fact that this wasn't inevitable, and what are the things that need to be done to moving forward?
Look, fires in Southern California are essentially inevitable. Fires have been in Southern California for as long as Southern California has been around. So that is inevitable. Right. Now, an urban fire in Southern California is not inevitable. I think, broadly speaking, there needs to be a conversation about much stricter building codes. There needs to be a conversation about insurance mandates requiring stronger construction codes, retrofitting. There needs to be, obviously, a hardening of the infrastructure in our cities. There needs to be a conversation about how cities are designed, in the sense of, are our cities essentially tinderboxes now? How we build new homes, how homes currently existing, how they are essentially fuel for fire, how they can be fireproofed. These seem like boring things, and they're certainly technical, but these are doable things. This is all not only doable, the retrofitting side is a job creator, right? I mean, we could create a whole new industry right now if we think about, how do we incentivize this? How do we reward this? How do we make sure insurance companies, for instance, give rebates to property owners who make the investments to fireproof their properties? Right now, a lot of that isn't basically happening at all. Obviously, longer term, getting off of fossil fuels. And to be clear, there is some good news on this. I mean, we reported this week, there were 98 days last year in which California ran 100% on renewable energy, and electricity rates did not rise individually, this doesn't necessarily hold, but across the board, the average electricity rates in California did not rise from that transition. So these are really positive steps. The renewable energy build out is going faster than a lot of people expected. So I am not a doomer about the prospects for dealing with the energy side of this more quickly than we even thought. But there's a pushback to it. I mean, this week we also learned Oklahoma is considering trying to essentially ban renewable energy. You've got major red states trying to force their pension funds to divest from investments that take into account the climate crisis. So there is a real battle here for how to reduce emissions long haul. Now, I know some people will hear this and say, look, we already got the fire, flooding, and hurricane danger baked in from the warming that we've already done. So at one level, you can take that and say, hey, why should we do anything? We're already screwed. My view is, I have kids, and maybe one day they'll have kids. Maybe it's bad now. If you or put it this way, if you think it's bad now at 1.5 degree warming, which we're at as of this year, how bad do you think it's going to be with 2 degree warming or 3 degree warming, right? It is our obligation to reduce our emissions right now, both for ourselves, but also for future generations. The idea that, oh, it's bad, so all we should do is sort of harden our houses and, keep driving gas guzzlers and, burning as much fossil fuel as we want because the cat's already out of the bag. That's not really how it works. And I think it's sort of an immoral way of looking at things. And also there's some evidence that if we quickly reduce our emissions, we don't know how fast the warming will stop. I just want to remind folks, and I don't know how fast it will be. Like, could it be thousands of years? Sure. Have there been some models that have said it could be 100 years, 50 years? Sure. So we don't know. So it seems to me the first thing we should do is try to do what we know would be better. And I want to remind people, look, when I was growing up, there was the terrifying, and I think people now maybe eye roll it, but for those who are as old as me, they remember, there was the terrifying fear of the ozone layer going away. Yeah. I mean, that was a real thing.
Right.
I mean, that was like really scary.
Aerosol sprays, right?
Yeah, it was super scary. Yeah, but it was the aerosol spray, but it was like, well, maybe other things are exacerbating it. Will it ever close? Oh, what are we going to do? Like, we're going to live on a planet where, like, if you go outside, you're going to get melted. Like, I mean, it was like really serious. And the world came together and solved that problem. Now, you could argue it was a smaller, more narrow problem, more isolated problem, but like that was a big deal back then. And it seemed potentially impossible to deal with, but we dealt with it. And now we like look back on it. It's like, oh my God, that's so quaint. So my point is, I think we can make a lot of progress really fast. And I'll go back to, to end a long answer. I'll go back and just say, I think we can deal with a lot of these problems very quickly and very effectively, but not if anytime anybody brings this up, there's eye rolling, scoffing, sighing. Oh, you're unsophisticated. You're a doomer. You're too heavy-handed. You're too on the nose. That to me is the societal mental block here. That we don't want to look at this. And I understand the desire not to look at this, but in not wanting to look at this, we just eye roll it. That's not my problem. That's somebody else's problem. They're being overwrought. They're being hysterical. No, that's the mental problem that we have to get over to then achieve the things that are entirely achievable right now.
Yeah, and I think another issue is, Trump is president. Democrats want to stop this, but they can't because Trump is president.
Yeah, I mean, I look. There's always a rotating villain, right? We can't stop it because of Joe Manchin.
Right.
Oh, exactly. We can't stop it because of the filibuster.
What's your response to that?
Oh, we can't stop it because of the parliamentarian. I mean, I'm sure the Obama.
And also, as if the suggestion also being like, oh, Biden did everything he could, right? When Biden was in power, he was so amazing on climate.
Right. I mean, I'm sure if the Pod Save Bros were here, they would look you straight in the eye and say, look, I know we had 59, 60 Senate votes, however, depending on how you count it. Oh yeah, we had massive congressional majorities. Oh yeah, the Obama won with a giant mandate. But there was Ben Nelson or Joe Lieberman, right? There's always a reason. Oh, we just couldn't. That is nonsense. I grant you that there are always going to be obstacles.
Sure.
But the Democratic Party treats power as something to conserve and hoard. They treat holding office as a trophy rather than a job. And the job of the Democratic Party is not to tell us that Donald Trump prevents them from doing what they allegedly want to do. The job of the Democratic Party is to figure out how to do the job of passing good policies, regardless of what the obstacles may be. This idea that we as voters, as citizens, have to be specialists in how the hell Chuck Schumer negotiates with the parliamentarian is a bunch of nonsense. The job of Chuck Schumer, the job of Joe Biden, the job of the Democratic leaders in Congress, they have one job. Their job is to be the experts in getting done the promises that they made. That's their job. Our job is to demand they make those promises and hold those promises and keep those promises. So you hear the Democrats, what are we going to do about the parliamentarian? And you hear their sycophants say, Obama couldn't have done anything because of this senator. That's nonsense. That's Stockholm syndrome. The correct, in my view, attitude is we elected these people. They've been given great power. With great power comes great responsibility. The one responsibility they have is to fulfill the promises they made to the voters and figure out, with their giant amount of staff and resources, figure out how to deal with the obstacles they face. That's their job.
Yeah, and perfect. You retweeted Ro Khanna, and we addressed this on Useful Idiots this week. But the story about the NLRB was just a perfect example of how Democrats always pretend to be incompetent, but it's really or powerless, but it's actually like an unwillingness.
Yeah, well, and the reason they pretend to be powerless is because they rely on the fact, or they rely on the assumption that their core supporters will believe them. I mean, the idea that, I just think about it in my life. If somebody makes a promise to me, and knowing what the obstacles are going to be, and then I come back to them and say, hey, what's up with that promise? What's up with that deal that we made? Right? It's a deal. I give you my vote. You make promises. I give you my vote. Then they come back. Hey, what's up with that deal? Oh, I couldn't get that done because the obstacle I knew was going to be in front of me ended up being an obstacle. Me on the other end of the deal is, well, you betrayed me. You sold me out. You lied to me because you knew what that obstacle was going to be. And it's, if you don't have the skill or the will, and that's the key part. It's not skill, it's will. If you don't have the will to figure it out, then get the hell out of here. Like, you're the problem. You're the obstacle. And so I think when we, the story of Ro Khanna and the NLRB vote, when he told it, Chuck Schumer wanted to do it, and there was a time that the vote was held open, and they somehow couldn't get in touch with, they couldn't find Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's presume that's all true. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't really give them the benefit of the doubt, but fine. She just somehow wasn't around.
Exactly. Be most charitable, right?
Yeah, fine. She wasn't around. Well, that means you didn't really want to do it that much, because if you really wanted to do it, you'd make sure she was around.
Exactly. You prioritize it.
Or she would have made sure she's around. Or this notion. Oh, we just tried. We didn't. You've just admitted that you weren't really serious about doing this, which is the fundamental problem. And the people who buy the idea that, oh, they tried, but they just, this and that happened. The Democratic Party relies on people saying, it's okay, they tried. As opposed to people saying, you didn't try, you lied.
Right.
You told me you were going to do stuff like this, and then you didn't care enough to actually execute and do what you needed to do to actually get it done. So you lied. And I think the way you get political leadership that actually delivers is by not buying the apologism, is by having a culture inside the Democratic Party among voters that says, if you're going to lie to me about a deal that you made with me, you made promises, I voted for you, then you have to leave. You're not getting my vote again. The party is not getting my vote again until it changes leaders who are more serious about delivering on the promises they make to us.
Well, thank you, David. As always, extremely eloquent and powerful words from you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Katie. Really appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. And you have a bunch of great pieces. We didn't even have time because I know you have a lot of stuff to do, but great pieces at the Lever. And the Lever's hiring, right?
Yes, we are. We're hiring some journalists. We are expanding. So you can check our stuff out at levernews.com.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Katie. Take care.
Bye. All right. That was great. So I just have some updates. Let's see. One thing I want to do is we have some Mike Davis to read. Sorry about the sun thing happening right now. We have some Mike Davis we're going to read. And also, I'll just stand like this the whole time. Let's see. Brad, can you show that, before we do that, can you show this update about this doctor who we covered? And thank you, everyone, for watching. And please do give this a like. If you haven't already given it a like, give it a thumbs up. You know what I'm talking about, Brad? The Palestine thing? Okay, great. And thanks, Brad, for helping with this. And thanks, Wilson, for helping with this. And thanks, Nate, for helping with this. Brad, of course, of the Katie Halper Show. Wilson of Useful Idiots. And Nate, Katie Halper Show researcher. No, I don't have a window shade here. I can also, okay, so all right, here's Drop Site News tweeted this. So first they tweeted out an excerpt from our live stream on Tuesday on the Katie Halper Show. I spoke with Dr. Thayer Ahmad, an American who worked with Dr. Sophia at Kamal Adwan to learn about the abducted doctor. And here is an update about Dr. Hassam Abu Safia. So according to the Palestinian NGO Al-Mezan, his detention was extended until 13 February 2025 by an Israeli court. Israeli authorities have also extended the ban on his access to legal counsel until 22 January 2025, making the second such extension since his abduction. And if people don't know about this, it's awful. And he is a doctor who bravely refused to abandon his patients. His son was killed by the IDF. He was already injured, and he's been kidnapped. And as we've gone over on this show, kidnapped doctors will be tortured to death and sometimes sexually abused as they're tortured. And we know this happens. And the United States government does nothing about it. And it is absolutely disgusting, and it's systemic, and it's not exceptional. Another update is that tragically, Dr. Sophia's mother died of a heart attack. I'm sure it was influenced by the tragic unknown fate of her son. And as we also pointed out, Dr. Sophia is a dual citizen. So he could have left Gaza, and it makes his bravery all the more impressive and moving. Okay. Also, anything else I was going to do an update on, Brad? Did I text you an update on anything else? No. Okay. And then I was just going to read some of the Mike Davis that Megan referred to. And so Nate, who does research for the Katie Halper Show, collected some of this. Nate, do we have a screenshot of this? If not, I can just, it's always nice to have a screenshot. If not, I'll cut it in. We'll cut it in later. Okay, so this is Nate. Tell me in text. This is from what? Oh, you sent it. You emailed it to me. Hold on 1 second. Did you email it to me, or had you get it to me? No, it's not on my email. Sorry, everyone. And thanks everyone so much for joining. Okay. And what is this from? Which book? Remind me. Brad, do you mind putting this in? And then we'll finish up by watching the Obama clip. Okay. And this is from Mike Davis, Ecology of, hold on 1 second. Is it of Fear? Sorry. Yes, Psychology of Fear. Mike Davis, Psychology of Fear. Brad, let me know if you got that screenshot. And thanks everyone for your patience. And I think this has been very informative. Sorry about the sun again. Okay. But the pressure during the 1920s boom to open the coastal range to speculative subdivision was unrelenting. In the hyperbole of the era, occupation of the mountains became Los Angeles's manifest destiny. Quote, "The day for the white invasion of the Santa Monicas has come," end quote, declared real estate clairvoyant John Russell McCarthy in a booklet published by the Los Angeles Times in 1925. In anticipation of this land rush, the county sheriff had been arresting every vagrant in sight and putting them to work on chain gangs, building roads through the rugged canyons just south of Rancho Malibu. Radical critics at the time denounced the system as deliberate real estate graft meant only to enhance land values in mountain districts which the population of the city does not even know exists. Okay, thank you. Now, final thing is, Brad, should we show that Obama video that David was mentioning? Might as well, right? Okay.
Sure. And I just wanted to say, Katie, I know we've talked a lot about lighting since we've been filming, and I appreciate the very contrasty thing, but it might be a little bit overdone in this instance.
Right. What are you? Oh, you're joking? As if I'm pretending? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay, got it.
I'm giving you a hard time.
I got it. Yeah.
So you want to play the Obama clip?
Yes, please. And I like this comment. I miss these kind of marathon Katie live streams to bring back memories of 2020. Yeah, remember?
Just shy of 8 hours was the record, I believe.
Was the record, yeah.
All right, here we go.
And I really got to go to the bathroom. So then we gotta...
Because, look, I know, I know we're an oil country, and we need American energy, and by the way, American energy production. You wouldn't always know it, but it went up every year I was president. And that whole suddenly America's like the biggest oil producer and the biggest that was me, people. I just want you to it's a little like sometimes you go to Wall Street and folks will be grumbling about anti-business. I said, have you checked where your stocks were when I came in office and where they are now? What are you talking? What are you complaining about? Just say thank you, please. Because I want to raise your taxes a couple percent.
Yeah, that's
hope and change, Katie.
Hope and change, yeah.
Yes,
and then,
yes, we can.
Well, you know what else has been making the rounds?
Hold
on. This kind of viral image, this image a lot of people are talking about, from Jimmy Carter's funeral. Did you see this of Trump and Obama?
Yeah.
Let's see. Do we have a good example of that? Just
if you give me a second.
Sure, yeah. Because as people know, the Democrats. I mean, to be fair, I don't think Obama did, but the Democrats often portrayed Trump as an existential threat and as a fascist. I'm not saying he's not an existential threat, but I think a lot of he's not perhaps uniquely an existential threat. And that this was a war for democracy. Democracy was on the line. And here is here's an image of Obama and Trump at the Carter funeral.
Yeah.
Just getting 1 second.
Oh, it's just trying to find a, okay. Here. So that's a still image, but what I was looking for, there was like
that's not even the chummiest one.
No. I can do better.
Yeah, you can do better.
But you just have to give me a second.
I think yeah.
Okay.
Wilson, do we have that from Useful Idiots?
I got it.
Okay.
I got it.
Oh wait. Well,
there
Nate sent us some video.
Okay.
Okay, you got it. Yeah.
And Bush dyeing his hair.
Huh.
I would assume.
Bush, you can't see him there, can you?
Yeah, it's at the end.
Okay, got it. Oh, I didn't see you were playing. Sorry, it's another window. Okay.
See, I'm like, dude, no way his hair is not pure white. Maybe it is. I don't know. But yeah, no, I think that it's fair.
Did you play it?
Yeah, it was played.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
I'll watch. See? Kind of reminds me of like that video of, or the photo of Trump and Bill and Hillary Clinton at, was one of their weddings. I forget who got married, but they were like sitting at a table and like full on, you know, mouth wide open laughing together and stuff like that. And, you know, it just kind of speaks to, it's just one big club. And
right, and you ain't in it.
Yeah. Because I can't disagree. Like if that guy was literally Cthulhu rising out of the sea and the most existential threat, you know, Hitler reincarnated, whatever, probably wouldn't be joking around with him.
Right.
Anyway,
yeah. Well, thank you so much everyone for watching. Also, we're gonna I may do a clip later, who knows, but
I need to give you sunglasses.
Jamie Lee Curtis, who wrote that?
No, I just said that.
Yeah.
Like we need to get you shades
I
or
know,
something.
yeah. Jamie Lee Curtis is trending for comments she made about Gaza and California, and we did at the Katie Halper show do a clip on a very interesting post by her. So we may make a little clip out of this for later.
Wow,
But
so she did it again?
well, she compared what was happening in California to Gaza.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, well, everyone, thank you so much for coming by. This is really great. If you haven't already liked this, please do like it. If you're watching it live, if you're watching it later, this is a great way to get, speaking of the podcast bros, we got to beat them and the algorithm. Thank you, Matt Wilson. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Phantomus Fantas, for the clips. And we will see you, let's see, Monday morning. We'll see you Monday morning. Useful Idiots, we'll see you Monday morning at 10 a.m. Monday. And then the Katie Halper Show, we'll see you Tuesday night at 7 p.m. And the guests on the Katie Halper Show are going to be Muin Rabbani and Yaakov Shapiro. It's going to be fascinating. And we're going to talk about, Yaakov and I are going to talk about some misunderstandings of the different, I guess we're going to talk about the difference between Judaism and Zionism, which some people, unfortunately, are conflating. And it's not just Israel, because we know that they do that for a living, but it's also people who claim to be anti-Zionist. And you can be anti-Zionist without being anti-Judaism. And I'm not a religious person, so I have no skin in the game. But I do want to say, every time an anti-Zionist makes this about the Talmud, they are doing Israel's bidding, because that's great propaganda. Because Israel wants nothing more than to be able to say that people who are critical of Israel's apartheid, occupation, and genocide are actually against Judaism or Jews. So keep it up. I mean, as long as you're getting paid by Israel, keep it up. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Bye.
Okay, I'm down.